Hey there, tonight we're diving into why being a medieval falconer wasn't as glamorous as it sounds. What you're about to discover is a life of relentless training, grueling hunts, and the constant fear of losing your feathered partner to a rival noble. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In medieval Europe, if you wanted to scream, "Look at me, I'm obscenely wealthy," but didn't have Instagram, you got yourself a falcon. It was the ultimate status symbol, a living, breathing badge of opulence perched right there on your wrist. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want to be the envy of all Bartholomew and his friends at the local tavern? But before you start picturing a dashing knight with a majestic bird soaring through azure skies, let's dig a little deeper into the muck and feathers of falconry life. First, a bit of history. Falconry is believed to have swooped into Europe around the early medieval period, catching on like wildfire among the nobility by the 12th century. It was originally imported from the East, where it had been practiced as far back as 2000 BC in Mesopotamia. By the time our medieval folks got their hands on it, it was less about hunting for survival and more about showing off. Falconry was not just a hobby, it was the medieval equivalent of owning a hypercar or a private jet. Now, acquiring a falcon was no small feat. This wasn't a matter of popping down to the local falconry dealer. Oh no, these birds were the Bentleys of the sky, and they came with a price tag to match. A trained falcon could cost as much as a small estate, and that's just the beginning. You didn't just buy a falcon, you invested in an entire lifestyle. We're talking about a crew of trainers, falconers, and a dedicated muse that's the medieval birdhouse for the uninitiated. Training a falcon wasn't for the faint-hearted or the impatient. It took weeks, sometimes months, to transform a wild bird into a hunter. And that's if everything went smoothly, which it rarely did. Picture trying to teach a cat to walk on a leash, but with more feathers and a greater risk of losing an eye. A falconer had to develop a bond with their bird, which meant spending hours every day in close proximity, cooing sweet nothings, or more likely, muttering curses when the falcon decided it preferred freedom over falconry. The logistics of falconry were downright absurd. The birds needed constant care and attention, and they weren't exactly low maintenance. A diet of fresh meat was obligatory, so if you were a falconer, you needed a steady supply of pigeons or rabbits. And let's not forget the paraphernalia involved. Hoods, jesses, lures, all bespoke, of course. In today's money, you'd be shelling out thousands annually just on accessories. It's no wonder only the wealthiest could afford to dabble in this feathery folly. But why did falconry become such a hot trend among the medieval elite? Well, apart from the undeniable thrill of commanding a bird of prey, it was all about impressing the neighbors. A falcon perched on a noble's arm was a walking advertisement of their wealth, power, and sophistication. It said, "I have the resources to control nature itself." And in a time when social media consisted of word of mouth and the occasional town crier, reputation was everything. Yet, let's not be fooled by romanticized paintings of serene hunts in picturesque landscapes. The reality was often a muddy, sweaty, and sometimes downright dangerous affair. Falcons were as unpredictable as medieval weather, and hunts could quickly devolve into chaos. There are stories of falcons flying off, never to return, leaving their owners red-faced and considerably poorer. And then there were the accidents. Talons and beaks weren't exactly designed with human safety in mind. Despite the risk and the cost, the appeal of falconry endured. It was more than just a pastime. It was an art form, a dance between human and bird that required skill, patience, and more than a little luck. There was something undeniably intoxicating about the power dynamic, a blend of mastery over nature and the humbling realization that, at any moment, your prized falcon might just fly off and make you look like a fool. In the end, the grit behind the glamour was what made falconry such a compelling sport. It was a test of character as much as it was a display of wealth. For those willing to endure the hardships, it offered a unique connection to the natural world, a fleeting partnership between man and bird that was as unpredictable as it was exhilarating. So next time you see a medieval painting of a nobleman with a falcon, remember, behind the serene facade was a cacophony of squawks, curses, and a whole lot of pigeon feathers. Now, under all the glitz and feathers, what did it really mean to be a medieval falconer? Spoiler alert, it was less about gallivanting through meadows and more about gritty, back-breaking labor. These weren't the cocktail parties of the animal kingdom, they were the grueling shift work. Picture this. Pre-dawn starts, mud up to your knees, and a bird that might or might not behave like it's supposed to. It was the medieval version of dealing with a high-maintenance celebrity diva, but with more talons. First off, a falconer's day usually began before the sun even had the chance to hit the snooze button. The birds needed to be fed, cleaned, and exercised. And by exercise, I mean an elaborate dance that involved lures, whistles, and the patience of a saint. You see, falcons weren't just unleashed to do as they pleased. Oh no, they needed to be trained meticulously to return on command. If you think teaching a toddler to share is tough, try convincing a bird of prey that your arm is more appealing than, say, the neighbor's chicken coop. The falconer, or oarstringer if you were dealing with hawks, wasn't just a bird handler. They were part-time vet, full-time psychologist, and occasionally a babysitter for the medieval elite. This wasn't a job for the faint-hearted. The falcons were temperamental, and let's face it, not the most grateful creatures. While the nobility paraded their feathered friends at court, the falconer was likely in the background, desperately hoping the bird wouldn't choose that moment to bolt. The economic demands on these birdmasters were nothing to scoff at. A falconer was often expected to provide his own gear. Imagine spending your salary on bespoke leather gloves and custom-made hoods. In today's terms, that's like having to buy your own equipment to work at a tech startup, except less coding, more beak dodging. And let's not ignore the food bill. Falcons weren't exactly on a paleo diet, but they were certainly carnivores with premium tastes. A falconer needed a steady supply of fresh meat, which was both costly and time-consuming to procure. Then there was the social hierarchy. In the grand scheme of medieval society, falconers found themselves in a peculiar spot. They were indispensable yet invisible, essential yet overshadowed by their employer's prestige. They rubbed shoulders with royalty, yet they were more akin to the hired help than the elite. It's a bit like being the roadie for a rock band. You do the heavy lifting, but someone else gets the applause. And while falconry itself was a symbol of power, being a falconer didn't automatically grant you a seat at the noble's table. Consider the tale of William de Warenne, a name that might not ring a bell unless you're deep into medieval genealogy. William, a nobleman with a penchant for falconry, found himself wrapped up in the sport's complexities. He wasn't the only one. Many a noble overestimated their falconry prowess. There's a grim humor in imagining these lords, accustomed to commanding armies, utterly flummoxed by a bird deciding it preferred the open skies to a gloved hand. The falconers, meanwhile, were left to clean up the mess, literally and figuratively. Falconry was a game of patience and prestige, an intricate dance of status and skill. But for the falconer, it was often a relentless grind. The glamour of the hunt belied the sweat and toil that went into every successful flight. Was the prestige worth the back-breaking labor? That's the million-dollar question, or rather, the small estate question of the medieval age. For the falconers who lived it, the answer might depend on whether their bird decided to come back that day, or if they were left chasing it across the countryside, dignity fluttering in the breeze. As we delve deeper into this world, let's not forget the sheer unpredictability of working with nature. Falcons were no respecters of social rank or human effort. They flew where they wanted, when they wanted, and sometimes not at all. It was a world where the line between triumph and embarrassment was as thin as a falcon's feather. So next time you see a medieval tapestry depicting a serene falconer and his bird, remember the unseen trials, the mud, the sweat, and the occasional squawk of frustration. The reality of falconry was less about majesty and more about mastering the chaos. Stay tuned, because there's a lot more to uncover in the tangled world of medieval falconry. Now, as we dig into the nuts and bolts, or more accurately, the feathers and talons of falconry, let's consider the technological and ecological hurdles these medieval bird whisperers faced. It's one thing to glamorize the sport of falconry with tales of knights in shining armor, but training these sky predators was more akin to conducting an orchestra with a set of unruly cymbals. The real drama unfolded not in the open fields or royal courts, but in the nitty-gritty of breeding, caring for, and training these magnificent creatures. Let's start with the breeding business, a feat that was about as predictable as medieval weather. Breeding falcons wasn't like pairing up fluffy rabbits. It was a complex, high-stakes game of genetics and sheer luck. Unlike today's avian enthusiasts with their controlled environments and genetic databases, medieval falconers worked with what they had: a keen eye and a whole lot of guesswork. They aimed for falcons with speed, agility, and the right temperament, but without modern science, they were playing a risky game of feathered roulette. The breeding season was a chaotic ballet of nature and nurture, with falconers needing to ensure the right conditions for breeding: plenty of space, a steady food supply, and a bit of privacy. Imagine trying to breed these birds while ensuring no one else swooped in to steal your prized eggs. It's like trying to guard your lunch in a break room full of hungry co-workers. And when it came to raising the fledglings, the odds of success were about as good as those of a medieval alchemist turning lead into gold. Once you'd managed to breed and raise a falcon, the next challenge was training it. You'd think that after the arduous task of breeding, training would be a breeze, right? Wrong. Training falcons was an exercise in patience and, let's face it, masochism. Medieval falconry manuals, like the famous De Arte Venandi cum Avibus by Emperor Frederick Roman II, offered plenty of advice, though some of it was as useful as a chocolate teapot. Frederick's work, while groundbreaking, was a blend of astute observations and downright bizarre notions about bird behavior. Take, for instance, the method of manning a falcon, a process that involved getting the falcon accustomed to humans. This entailed carrying the bird with you everywhere, day and night. Yes, you heard that right, everywhere. Falconers were instructed to keep their birds awake and active, sometimes for days, to break their spirit and make them more compliant. It's like the medieval version of pulling an all-nighter, but with more feathers and fewer textbooks. The risks of training were not just a matter of bird temperament, but also personal safety. Falcons, after all, are not known for their gentle natures. They come equipped with talons sharp enough to make a butcher's knife look like a butter spreader. Training accidents were par for the course, and a falconer's scars were as much a badge of honor as they were an occupational hazard. If you were lucky, you only got a few scratches. If not, you might end up with a war story that involved a trip to the medieval equivalent of the ER, a leech and a prayer. Let's not overlook the ecological challenges either. The falconer's life was intimately tied to the natural world, long before sustainability became a buzzword. Falcons had to be caught or bred, and their prey, rabbits, small birds, and other critters, had to be sourced sustainably. Overhunting could deplete local wildlife, turning a falconer into an accidental conservationist. It was a delicate dance between man and nature, one that required a deep understanding of local ecosystems and a respect for the natural balance. The falconer's toolkit was another marvel of medieval innovation. The equipment required was not only elaborate but bespoke. From custom hoods to handcrafted jesses, each piece had to fit perfectly. These weren't mere accessories. They were essential tools for control and communication. A poorly fitting hood could stress a bird, and a weak jess could result in a lost falcon. It was craftsmanship at its finest, a testament to the skill and ingenuity of medieval artisans. But let's not be too quick to romanticize this. The falconer's life, while fascinating, was fraught with challenges that went beyond the practical and ecological. It was a world of contradictions, where one had to be both a master and a servant, a nurturer and a disciplinarian, a lover of nature and its manipulator. And all this effort was in the service of a pastime that, while prestigious, was ultimately a luxury for those with the means to indulge in it. In many ways, the life of a medieval falconer was a microcosm of the era itself, a blend of wonder and hardship, where the pursuit of beauty and status often came at a high cost. It was a world that demanded respect for the natural order while simultaneously bending it to human will. And perhaps that's what made falconry such an enduring symbol of medieval life. It was a testament to humanity's unending quest to soar above its earthly bounds, even if it meant getting a little muddy in the process. As we continue to unravel the world of medieval falconry, remember that the stories we tell about the past are as much about the people who lived it as the birds they trained. It's a history written not just in ink and parchment, but in the feathers and flight of falcons, in the scars and stories of those who dared to tame them. Stay tuned, because the world of falconry has more twists and turns than an aerial hunt, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface. Now, speaking of soaring high, let's dive into the skies of medieval diplomacy where falconry played a starring role. You see, in a world where a well-placed bird could change the course of politics, falcons were more than just airborne bling. They were feathered diplomats, flitting between courts like avian ambassadors. Forget the handshake or the exchange of business cards. In the medieval power game, a falcon was the ultimate calling card. Let's set the scene. It's the Middle Ages, and Europe is a patchwork of squabbling kingdoms and duchies, each trying to outdo the other in prestige and influence. In this tangled web of politics, falconry emerged as a surprising tool of soft power. Monarchs and nobles would gift falcons to each other as a gesture of goodwill, a sign that said, "We're friends, or at least pretending to be for now." These birds were the medieval equivalent of a Rolex or a luxury car, a token of wealth and respect. Take, for example, the notorious King John of England, who was known for his less-than-stellar reign. Think of him as the medieval monarch version of a bad sequel. Despite his political blunders, he was an avid falconer and used his birds to curry favor with European rulers. In 1213, he sent a gyrfalcon, one of the most prized species, to his cousin Otto Roman IV, Holy Roman Emperor. This wasn't just a gift, it was a diplomatic maneuver, an attempt to patch up relations and secure an ally. Gyrfalcons were the creme de la creme of falconry, fetching astronomically high prices. Think the medieval equivalent of a couple of Teslas. But it wasn't just about gifting birds. Falconry itself was a platform for forging alliances. Picture a hunting expedition where nobles gathered not just to catch prey, but to catch up on the latest political gossip and negotiate treaties. These hunts were less about the thrill of the chase and more about networking. Imagine a medieval LinkedIn, but with more feathers and fewer spreadsheets. Falconry's role in diplomacy was underscored by the fact that not everyone could just pick up a falcon and start bargaining with it. There were laws. Oh boy, were there laws. The medieval legal system had a whole aviary of regulations dictating who could own what kind of bird. It was like a rigid caste system, but for falcons. Only the highest-ranking nobles could own the most prestigious species, like gyrfalcons and peregrines. Lesser nobles had to make do with goshawks or sparrowhawks. Why such stringent rules? Well, it all boiled down to control and symbolism. Allowing everyone access to top-tier falcons would have diluted the bird's status as symbols of power. It was a way to maintain the social order, ensuring that the nobility's feathers shone the brightest. It also meant that falconry was a club with an exclusive membership, and the right bird on your wrist was a ticket into the upper echelons of society. But let's not romanticize this feathery hierarchy too much. The reality was that these laws were as much about asserting control as they were about maintaining decorum. For the medieval elite, flaunting a rare falcon was akin to flexing their muscles, a not-so-subtle reminder of their dominance. It was a power play, pure and simple, with a falcon perched proudly at its center. These regulations also served as a reminder that even the most passionate bird enthusiasts were at the mercy of the crown. It was a lesson in humility. No matter how skilled a falconer you were, your status and privileges could be clipped with the stroke of a quill. And while the nobility reveled in the prestige of falconry, the common folk could only watch from the sidelines, their dreams of avian grandeur forever out of reach. Yet, despite this rigid structure, falconry's allure was undeniable. It was a sport that transcended borders and cultures, a shared passion that brought rivals together in a rare moment of harmony. The birds themselves became symbols of peace and cooperation, bridging divides in a world often torn apart by conflict. It was a testament to the power of nature, a reminder that even amidst human squabbles, there was beauty and grace to be found in the skies above. As we continue to unravel the threads of medieval falconry, keep in mind that this was a world of contradictions. It was a realm where the pursuit of status and power often clashed with the unpredictability of nature, where the elegance of flight masked the grittiness of the hunt. And as we delve deeper, we'll see how this intricate dance between man and bird shaped not just individual lives, but the course of history itself. Stay with us, because there's still much more to uncover in this feathery saga of medieval intrigue and ambition. Falconry, while a fascinating dance of politics and prestige in medieval times, was also an art form that demanded respect, patience, and a touch of insanity, qualities that seem to resonate with today's enthusiasts. Fast forward to the present, and you'll find falconry has shed some of its royal plumage, but retained its mystique. No longer the exclusive domain of kings and nobles, modern falconry invites anyone with the dedication and a decent pair of gloves to partake in its ancient allure. Today, falconry is practiced in over 60 countries, with the United Arab Emirates leading the pack, where it's not just a hobby but a national sport. There are roughly 60,000 registered falconers worldwide, a number that would have been unthinkable in the medieval era when having a falcon was about as common as owning a unicorn. And while you won't need a small estate to get started, the initial investment is still hefty. A trained falcon can cost anywhere from $1,000 to $100,000, depending on the species and the training involved. Plus, you'll need the requisite gear: hoods, jesses, gauntlets, the works. So, while the economic barrier has lowered, it certainly hasn't disappeared. One might wonder if the prestige of medieval falconry holds any clout today. In a world where prestige is measured in Instagram likes and Twitter followers, does the sight of a falcon perched regally on an arm still command awe? The answer is a resounding yes, albeit for different reasons. Where once falconry was a mark of wealth and influence, it now symbolizes a connection to nature, an appreciation for history, and a commitment to conservation. Today's falconers are as likely to be environmentalists as they are hobbyists, often involved in breeding programs to help preserve endangered species. But let's not get too carried away with the romanticism. Modern falconry, like its medieval ancestor, is not all soaring vistas and majestic flights. It involves a lot of the same gritty realities: early mornings, endless patience, and the occasional talon-induced scar. Falcons are still not the most cooperative of animals, and even the most experienced falconers have tales of their birds deciding, quite suddenly, that freedom looks awfully tempting. And let's not forget the logistics. A falcon's diet hasn't changed much over the centuries. Fresh meat is still the order of the day, and it's not getting any cheaper. The media, of course, has had a field day with falconry, often painting it with the same romantic brush used for medieval depictions. Movies and books love to show fearless knights with their trusty falcons swooping down at just the right moment. But as we've uncovered, the truth was a lot messier. In real life, falconers were more likely to be muttering under their breath as they trudged through the mud, hoping today wasn't the day their bird decided to go rogue. Modern falconers are quick to remind us that while falconry might look glamorous from afar, it's a labor of love that demands time, effort, and a healthy sense of humor. In terms of legacy, falconry has left an indelible mark on our cultural landscape, from medieval tapestries to modern conservation efforts. It has survived invasions, revolutions, and the rise of technology, weaving its way into the fabric of human history. The enduring allure of falcons speaks to something fundamental about our relationship with nature, a longing to connect, to tame, and perhaps to understand our place within it. So, is falconry a relic of the past or a vital practice of the present? It's a bit of both, really. It captures the imagination with its tales of knights and nobles, while simultaneously reminding us of the practical challenges and environmental responsibilities. Perhaps that's the secret to its lasting appeal. It's a blend of fantasy and reality, a sport that demands respect for nature and history while inviting us to dream of soaring high. As we wrap up this feathery exploration, let's leave with a thought as sharp as a falcon's gaze. The falcon cannot hear the falconer, wrote W.B. Yeats in The Second Coming, capturing the eternal tension between human ambition and nature's wild spirit. It's a reminder that while we may strive to control and command, true mastery lies in understanding and respecting the world around us. Falconry, in all its complexity, remains a testament to that delicate balance. So next time you see a falcon wheeling in the sky, remember the centuries of history it carries on its wings, a legacy as vast and untamed as the skies themselves. In the bustling chaos of 16th century Germany, a time when the Holy Roman Empire was as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm, a little boy named Johannes Kepler was born in the town of Weil-der-Stadt. Now, if you're picturing a quaint, fairy-tale village with cobblestone streets and gingerbread houses, hold that thought. Kepler's childhood was less Brothers Grimm and more grim reality. His father, Heinrich, was a mercenary. Yes, one of those guys who made a living by fighting for whoever paid him best. Spoiler alert, Heinrich wasn't exactly rolling in cash, so the Kepler household wasn't swimming in luxury. Johannes came into this world on December 27, 1571, under a sky that he would one day chart with unparalleled precision. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. His early years were marked by a string of illnesses that stuck to him like a bad cold. The kid had more ailments than a hypochondriac's diary entries. Smallpox, for example, left him with a less-than-ideal eyesight. Imagine trying to map the cosmos when you can't even read the road signs. But Kepler wasn't one to let a little thing like poor vision stop him from seeing beyond the stars. Education was Kepler's golden ticket, or at least his parents hoped it would be. He was shipped off to the University of Tübingen, a place known for churning out theologians like cookies from a bakery. Johannes was supposed to become a Lutheran minister, but he had other plans. Instead of focusing on the divine, his eyes, blurred as they might have been, were glued to the heavens. You see, Kepler had a knack for numbers, and he was more interested in the math behind the universe than the sermons in a pulpit. At Tübingen, Kepler fell under the spell of the Copernican system. It was like discovering a new favorite band that nobody had heard of yet. The idea that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe was as radical as saying the world was round to a flat earther. Kepler's professor, Michael Meislin, was one of the few who dared to teach this heliocentric theory, and Kepler lapped it up like a cat with cream. This was the kind of rebellious thinking that made his professors nervous, like watching a kid play with matches. Despite his frail health, Kepler's mind was sharper than attack. By 1594, he'd landed a teaching gig in Graz, thanks to his stellar, pun intended, performance at Tübingen. He taught mathematics and astronomy, though it's safe to say not all of his students shared his enthusiasm for planetary motion. Not content with just teaching, Kepler began writing his first major work, Mysterium Cosmographicum, a book that was as much a love letter to the Copernican system as it was a mathematical manifesto. Kepler was convinced that the universe was built on geometric principles, a cosmic architecture laid out by a divine mathematician. His ideas were bold, and they were about to make some serious waves in the world of astronomy. But let's not sugarcoat it. Trying to convince people that the universe didn't revolve around them was like telling a narcissist they're not the center of attention. Yet, despite his groundbreaking ideas, Kepler's life wasn't all sunshine and celestial wonders. The political climate was as tumultuous as a soap opera, with religious tensions simmering just below the surface. As a Protestant in a predominantly Catholic area, Kepler had to navigate these troubled waters carefully, a bit like tiptoeing through a minefield. His job security was about as stable as a Jenga tower on a shaky table, a reality that added a little extra spice to his already challenging life. Kepler's early work laid the groundwork for a career that would eventually redefine our understanding of the cosmos. But in those formative years, he was just a young man with a head full of dreams and a world that wasn't quite ready for his ideas. He was an underdog in the best sense of the word, battling illness, poverty, and a society that preferred its Earth at the center of everything. Yet, despite the odds stacked against him, Johannes Kepler was poised to change the way we see the universe, one equation at a time. And so, with a head brimming with dreams and a universe not yet ready for his mathematical wizardry, Kepler's journey into the heart of astronomical discovery was only just beginning. Enter Tycho Brahe, a man who was as flamboyant as a peacock in a room full of pigeons. If Kepler was the underdog, Brahe was the eccentric rock star of astronomy, complete with a pet elk and a nose made of brass. Seriously, the man lost part of his nose in a duel and wore a prosthetic that was as much a conversation starter as his lavish parties. Brahe was the kind of guy who could make even the most outlandish reality TV star look like a shrinking violet. Born into Danish nobility in 1546, Tycho was the kind of wealthy that could afford to turn an entire island, Achaemenid, to be exact, into his personal observatory/science lab. He built Uraniborg, a name as grandiose as the man himself, and filled it with more astronomical instruments than you could shake a sextant at. His data was the gold standard of the time, meticulously recorded and obsessively guarded like a pirate's treasure. When Kepler and Brahe first met in 1600, it was the start of an astronomical odd couple. Think of it as the original buddy cop drama, with one partner a flamboyant aristocrat and the other a humble math nerd. Brahe, with his penchant for peacocking, needed someone like Kepler, whose calculating mind could make sense of the celestial chaos. Kepler needed Brahe too, though not necessarily for the wild dinner parties. What he needed was access to Brahe's extensive planetary data, which was more accurate than anything available at the time. But their relationship wasn't all starry skies and seamless collaboration. Picture Kepler, the modest, practical mathematician, trying to work under the thumb of a man who once held a banquet for the King of Denmark and reportedly had a pet elk that died from a drunken fall down the stairs. The tension between them was almost cosmic in its own right. Brahe was a meticulous observer, but he guarded his data like a dragon with gold. Kepler, on the other hand, was a theorist, eager to dive into the numbers and extract the secrets of the universe. Despite the friction, Brahe saw potential in Kepler's sharp mind and invited him to join his team at Benaki Castle near Prague. It was a turbulent time in Europe, with religious wars brewing and the Holy Roman Empire in a constant state of flux. Yet, amidst the political chaos, these two men were focused on the stars. Brahe's instruments were the best of their kind, and his observations spanned decades, but he needed Kepler's mathematical genius to turn raw data into groundbreaking theory. Then, in 1601, Brahe suddenly died, under mysterious circumstances, no less. Some whispered of poisoning, though modern analysis suggests a more mundane cause like kidney failure. Whatever the case, Brahe's death left Kepler with the keys to a kingdom of astronomical data. It was as if he'd been handed the Rosetta Stone of the cosmos, and Kepler, ever the dedicated scholar, wasted no time in deciphering it. Now, let's talk about the data itself. Brahe's records were as detailed as a modern GPS, noting the positions of planets with a precision that was astonishing for the time. Yet, without the computational tools we take for granted, making sense of this mountain of information was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. Kepler had to rely on his keen mathematical insight and a bit of trial and error, a method that was as frustrating as it was revolutionary. Kepler's task was monumental, to prove that the paths of planets were not perfect circles, as was traditionally believed, but ellipses. This was like telling everyone that their favorite storybook villain had a heart of gold all along. It was a paradigm shift that required not just data, but also the courage to challenge centuries of established thought. Through a painstaking process that would make most people's heads spin, Kepler formulated his first two laws of planetary motion. The first law, the law of ellipses, stated that planets orbit the Sun in elliptical paths, with the Sun at one focus. The second law, the law of equal areas, described how a line segment joining a planet and the Sun sweeps out equal areas during equal intervals of time. These weren't just abstract concepts. They were mathematical descriptions that fit Brahe's observations like a glove. Kepler's breakthrough didn't happen overnight. It was the result of years of laborious calculations, fueled by a relentless quest for understanding. He even had to invent new mathematical techniques, like the rudimentary form of integral calculus, to make sense of the data. If you've ever felt frustrated by a complex problem, imagine doing it without a calculator or even a reliable table of logarithms. As Kepler's laws began to circulate, they were as controversial as they were revolutionary. Imagine telling a room full of geocentrists that their cherished circular orbits were as out of style as last year's fashion. Yet, these laws laid the groundwork for future astronomers, including a guy named Isaac Newton, who would later use Kepler's findings to develop his own laws of motion. Kepler's journey from Brahe's apprentice to the author of groundbreaking laws was a testament to the power of curiosity and perseverance. The universe, once seen as a harmonious celestial ballet, was now understood to follow precise mathematical principles. And while Kepler didn't have a pet elk or a brass nose, his legacy was no less remarkable. His work was a turning point in the history of science, steering humanity's understanding of the cosmos onto a new trajectory. But Kepler's story doesn't end here, not by a long shot. His laws were just the beginning of a life spent unraveling the mysteries of the universe. So stay tuned, because the next chapters are filled with more twists, triumphs, and tribulations that would make even the most dramatic soap opera look tame. Kepler's journey from brass apprentice to the author of groundbreaking laws may have been akin to stumbling upon a treasure map, but the adventure was far from over. He was about to face challenges that would test his resilience more than a cosmic puzzle ever could. With the ink barely dry on his first 2 laws, Kepler turned his attention to completing the trilogy with a 3rd law. Like any good sequel, this one promised more complexity, more drama, and a few unexpected plot twists. Now, if you've ever tried to balance your checkbook while juggling flaming torches, you'll have some idea of what Kepler was up against. The Holy Roman Empire was embroiled in the 30 Years' War, a conflict that was less Game of Thrones and more game of who's got the most chaos. The war started in 1618 and was essentially a continental free-for-all over religion, territory, and power, leaving Europe like a chessboard after a particularly wild match where half the pieces were missing. Kepler, a Protestant in a Catholic-dominated empire, found himself navigating this tumultuous landscape with the finesse of a tightrope walker in a hurricane. His position as imperial mathematician was about as secure as a sandcastle at high tide. The war affected everything, from paper shortages for publishing to the very stability of the institutions that funded scientific research. Yet amid the chaos, Kepler's mind remained firmly fixed on the stars. In 1619, Kepler published Harmonices Mundi, or The Harmony of the World. Now, don't let the poetic title fool you into thinking this was some light bedtime reading. This was Kepler's cosmic symphony, blending astronomy, astrology, and music theory into a grand theory of everything. He boldly proposed that the planets moved with a harmony akin to musical notes, a celestial orchestra conducted by the laws of physics. Picture this: planets as musicians in a grand cosmic concert, each orbit a note in the divine melody. It was like the ultimate crossover event. Astronomy meets music in a mashup worthy of a Grammy. Kepler's 3rd law of planetary motion emerged from this melodic framework. Here's the gist, without putting you to sleep. The square of a planet's orbital period is proportional to the cube of the semi-major axis of its orbit. In simpler terms, the farther a planet is from the Sun, the longer it takes to complete its orbit. This insight was like finding the missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle, one that brought harmony to the celestial chaos. But let's not romanticize this as a eureka moment in a quiet study. Kepler's journey to this discovery was more like a marathon through a minefield. He was under constant pressure, financially, politically, and even religiously. The 30 Years' War meant resources were scarce, and political alliances shifted like quicksand. Kepler had to publish his work in Protestant-friendly territories, which wasn't exactly a walk in the park, considering the whole continent was a patchwork of conflicting loyalties. Kepler's 3rd law wasn't just a scientific triumph. It was a beacon of rationality in a world that seemed hell-bent on tearing itself apart. It was a reminder that, despite the chaos on Earth, the cosmos moved to its own eternal rhythm, untouched by human folly. Yet, for all its elegance, Kepler's work was met with skepticism. His ideas were as welcome as a bull in a china shop to those clinging to the outdated geocentric models. It was a classic case of old habits dying hard. Despite the skepticism, Kepler's work laid the foundation for future scientists like Newton. Yes, the Apple guy, who would later use Kepler's laws to develop the theory of universal gravitation. Kepler had essentially set the stage for the scientific revolution, even as the world around him seemed determined to regress into medieval chaos. In the midst of war, Kepler was also grappling with personal challenges. His mother was accused of witchcraft, a charge about as welcome as a tax audit, and Kepler had to defend her in court. It's hard to focus on the harmony of the spheres when you're busy defending your family against superstitious zealots. Yet, despite these trials, Kepler's humor remained intact. He once quipped that if there were witches, he would have been turned into a newt long ago given his penchant for challenging the status quo. Kepler's story is a testament to the power of the human spirit to rise above chaos and find order in the universe. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, the pursuit of knowledge can be a guiding light. And while Kepler didn't live to see the full impact of his discoveries, his legacy is a symphony that continues to resonate through the ages. So the next time you gaze at the stars, remember Kepler and his cosmic harmony, a melody that plays on, undaunted by the tumult of time. As we leave Kepler amidst the celestial concert he orchestrated, know that his journey is far from over. The next chapter promises more intrigue, more cosmic revelations, and more of Kepler's indomitable spirit. Stay tuned, because if history has taught us anything, it's that the most enlightening tales are never truly finished. As we leave Kepler amidst the celestial concert he orchestrated, know that his journey is far from over. The next chapter promises more intrigue, more cosmic revelations, and more of Kepler's indomitable spirit. Stay tuned, because if history has taught us anything, it's that the most enlightening tales are never truly finished. Now, let's zip ahead to Kepler's time as imperial mathematician to Rudolf Roman II, a position that was supposed to be the golden ticket to stability, but turned out to be more like a roller coaster ride at an abandoned theme park. Rudolf Roman II, the Holy Roman Emperor, was as eccentric as emperors come. Imagine Monty Python's King Arthur meets a Renaissance art enthusiast, and you'll get the picture. Rudolf had a penchant for the arts and sciences, collecting anything from exotic animals to bizarre mechanical contraptions. If it was weird, wacky, or wondrous, Rudolf was interested. Kepler, in theory, was the perfect fit for this court of curiosities. But here's the rub. Rudolf's reign was about as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake zone. The empire was crumbling under the weight of religious conflicts, and Rudolf himself was more interested in alchemy than astronomy. Kepler's position was akin to being the star player on a team that never showed up for practice. And it didn't help that Rudolf's treasury was as empty as a teenager's fridge. Kepler's salary was often delayed, sporadic, or in some cases, just a figment of someone's imagination. Yet, ever the optimist, or perhaps just too stubborn to quit, Kepler persevered. He navigated the court's political maelstrom with the finesse of a diplomat and the patience of a saint. It was during this turbulent period that Kepler made some of his most profound contributions to science, proving that adversity is often the best catalyst for innovation. One of Kepler's lesser-known but equally groundbreaking works was his foray into optics. You see, Kepler wasn't just about the stars. He was equally fascinated with how we see them. In 1604, he wrote Astronomiae Pars Optica, a treatise on the science of optics that laid the groundwork for the future of telescopic observation. This was revolutionary stuff, like discovering the user manual for your eyes. But Kepler didn't stop there. He took Galileo's rudimentary telescope, essentially the iPhone one of its day, and gave it a serious upgrade. Enter the Keplerian telescope, which used convex lenses to produce a more powerful and clearer image. This was akin to going from a grainy VHS tape to glorious HD. It wasn't just a minor tweak, it was a leap into a new era of observation. The Keplerian telescope was a game-changer. It allowed astronomers to see further and clearer than ever before, opening up the heavens in ways that were previously unimaginable. It was the telescope that set the stage for future astronomical discoveries, proving that sometimes it really is all about the optics. Yet, despite these monumental achievements, Kepler's life was a series of financial close shaves and professional disappointments. His pursuit of understanding the cosmos was often punctuated by rejections and setbacks that would have made lesser men throw in the towel. In one particularly illustrative episode, Kepler tried to secure a patron to fund his work. He sent letters to various European nobles, only to receive more polite declines than a telemarketer at dinner time. But Kepler wasn't one to let rejection get him down. He had an unshakable belief in his work and a sense of humor that could lighten even the darkest of days. During one particularly lean period, he quipped that he was so broke, he couldn't afford to pay attention. It was this resilience, this ability to find humor in hardship, that kept him going when the world seemed determined to edge him out. Kepler's story is a narrative of persistence and passion, of a man who refused to let the universe's mysteries remain unsolved. His later years, though fraught with challenges, were a testament to his dedication. Despite the financial instability, the political chaos, and the personal heartaches, Kepler's gaze remained fixed on the stars. He was a man who understood that the cosmos was a puzzle worth solving, even if the pieces were scattered across a turbulent world. And so, with a telescope in one hand and a stack of unpaid bills in the other, Kepler continued his quest for knowledge. His life was a blend of brilliance and struggle, a reminder that genius often comes hand in hand with hardship. As we delve deeper into his later years, we'll uncover more of the trials and triumphs that defined this extraordinary man. Stay tuned, because the tale of Johannes Kepler is far from over, and the cosmos still holds many more secrets waiting to be revealed. As we delve deeper into Kepler's later years, we find ourselves in the thick of a cosmic detective story, where our hero is armed not with a magnifying glass, but with a telescope and an insatiable thirst for the truth. Johannes Kepler, the man who dared to see the universe differently, soldiered on in his quest to untangle the celestial knots that had baffled mankind for centuries. And while his personal ledger might have been as barren as a lunar landscape, Kepler's mind was a veritable galaxy of ideas. Let's talk about Kepler's legacy, a term thrown around as liberally as a politician's promises, but in his case, it actually sticks. The laws of planetary motion, those cosmic guidelines he painstakingly carved out of Tycho Brahe's mountain of data, were nothing short of revolutionary. They weren't just mathematical curiosities or academic trifles. These laws reshaped our understanding of the solar system. Before Kepler, the heavens were a realm of perfect circles, a celestial merry-go-round that had been accepted as gospel truth since antiquity. But Kepler, with his love for ellipses, turned that notion on its head. His first law, the law of ellipses, was a celestial coup d'etat, dethroning the circle and setting the stage for a more accurate model of planetary orbits. Kepler's second law, the law of equal areas, was no less groundbreaking. It described how planets speed up and slow down in their orbits, a concept that was as mind-bending than as trying to fathom why airline peanuts are so small today. And then there was the third law, the harmony of the worlds, which provided a harmonious relationship between the planets' orbits and their distance from the sun. A symphony in numbers, if you will. These laws were more than just theoretical musings. They were the foundation upon which another great mind would build. Enter Isaac Newton, who in 1687 published his Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation owe a hefty debt to Kepler's work. Without Kepler's meticulous observations and mathematical insights, Newton might have been just another guy sitting under a tree, dodging apples. Kepler gave Newton the scaffolding needed to construct his grand edifice of gravitational theory. But let's pull back the curtain on the myths that have surrounded Kepler like a thick fog. There's a romantic notion that Kepler was the quintessential lone genius, toiling away in an ivory tower. In reality, his life was a series of uphill battles against poverty, political instability, and religious strife. He wasn't some ethereal sage detached from the world. He was a man who had to play the political game to survive. His role as imperial mathematician might sound grand, but in reality it was fraught with financial insecurity and the constant threat of losing favor. Kepler's personal life was no less tumultuous. He married twice, experiencing the joys and sorrows of family life while also dealing with the societal pressures of his time. His first wife, Barbara, died young, leaving him to raise their children. His second marriage to Susanna was happier, but still marked by the era's challenges. And then there was the infamous witch trial of his mother, Katharina, accused of witchcraft, a charge concocted from superstition and malice. Kepler defended her with the same tenacity he applied to his astronomical calculations. It was a dark chapter, a reminder that the rational world Kepler sought to illuminate was still shrouded in shadows. Despite these hardships, Kepler's curiosity never waned. He was a man who looked at the stars and saw a puzzle to be solved, not just a pretty backdrop for a romantic evening. His work wasn't just about charting the heavens. It was about understanding our place within them. Kepler's legacy is a testament to the power of persistence and the human capacity for wonder. He showed us that sometimes, seeing the universe clearly doesn't require perfect eyesight, just a keen mind and an unyielding spirit. In the grand tapestry of scientific history, Kepler's threads are woven with the precision of his calculations and the boldness of his vision. His laws of planetary motion are not just relics of a bygone era. They are living principles that continue to guide astronomers today. From the precise calculations of spacecraft trajectories to the search for exoplanets, Kepler's insights remain a cornerstone of modern astronomy. So, as we wrap up our journey through the life and legacy of Johannes Kepler, let's take a moment to appreciate the audacity of his vision. Here was a man who dared to question the cosmic status quo, who saw patterns where others saw chaos, and who turned the heavens from a divine mystery into a mathematical marvel. His story is a reminder that the universe is vast and mysterious, but also knowable if only we're willing to look beyond the obvious and challenge our assumptions. As you gaze up at the night sky, remember Kepler, not just for his contributions to science, but for his unwavering belief in the power of human intellect. His legacy is a beacon for all who dare to dream, to question, and to seek the truth beyond the stars. And if there's one thing Kepler's story teaches us, it's that sometimes the clearest vision comes not from the eyes, but from the mind. In the sun-drenched islands of Polynesia, where the sand is as fine as powdered sugar and the ocean as vast as your student loan debt, society wasn't just a simple beach party. It was a structured hierarchy where not everyone could be the big kahuna. At the top of this tropical pyramid sat the Ali class, the Polynesian chiefs who could strut around in a feathered headdress and make it work better than any catwalk model. But these chiefs weren't just about looking regal. They wielded power with the kind of finesse that would make even the slickest politician green with envy. The Ali didn't just pop up because they had a winning smile or a talent for ukulele. No, their authority was deeply rooted in genealogical prestige. Think of it as the original version of a LinkedIn profile, but with more tattoos and less corporate jargon. These folks could trace their lineage back to guards or legendary ancestors, which was a neat trick when you want to command respect without lifting a finger. So, if you ever wondered how one could command a society without a Twitter following, the Ali had it figured out centuries ago. Now, let's sprinkle in some numbers to keep things grounded. In Hawaii, for instance, the Ali made up about 1% of the population. That's right, they were the 1% before it was cool. This elite class held sway over land and resources, which was no small feat considering the island's limited real estate. They didn't just own beachfront properties. They owned the whole beach and the fish in the ocean, too. In a world where land equals power, having control over these resources was like having the keys to the kingdom. But let's not romanticize these chiefs too much. They weren't the benevolent rulers of Disney lore, handing out lays and wisdom like coconut-flavored candy. Sure, they were revered, but they could also be as cutthroat as any power-hungry ruler in history. The idea of the noble, wise chief is a charming myth, but often these leaders had to be as politically savvy and ruthless as a Game of Thrones character to maintain their position. If you thought your office politics were brutal, try competing in a world where a misstep could lead to a coup, or worse, being sacrificed to the gods. The Ali's power wasn't just about who their great-great-grandparents were, though. It was also about resource control. Picture this. You're living on an island with finite resources, and your survival depends on the goodwill of the guy who controls the best fishing spots. The Ali were masters at managing these resources, distributing them in a way that kept their subjects fed and their enemies at bay. It was a delicate balancing act of diplomacy, generosity, and a little bit of intimidation. After all, nothing says, stay in line, quite like a chief with a strong genealogy and a strategic grip on your food supply. And before you think these chiefs were just sitting around sipping kava, let's talk about the social obligations that came with their status. The Ali were expected to perform certain ceremonial duties, which were as much about public relations as they were about tradition. They had to maintain the favor of the gods and their people, a task that involved elaborate rituals, offerings, and the occasional human sacrifice. It's a bit like being a modern CEO. You have to keep the board, in this case, the spiritual and social forces, happy while ensuring the shareholders, the people, don't revolt. It's easy to see why the Ali class became the stuff of legends, with tales of their wisdom and courage passed down through generations. But scratch the surface, and you'll find the gritty reality of maintaining power in a society where everyone's watching your every move. They might have had the best seats at the luau, but they also carried the weight of their people's expectations, and the constant threat of being overthrown. So, the next time you daydream about the idyllic life of a Polynesian chief, Remember, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Sure, there were perks, like the best seats at the feast, and a lineage to brag about, but it also came with the kind of stress that would make even the most seasoned executive reach for a stress ball. The alley were complex figures, balancing the allure of myth with the harsh realities of leadership. And as they navigated these waters, they set the stage for the intricate social fabric of Polynesian societies that continues to fascinate us today. Now, while the alley were busy managing their island empires with the finesse of a reality TV star dodging scandal, let's turn our gaze to the backbone of Polynesian society, the Achaemenid, or common folk. These were the everyday heroes whose efforts kept everything from collapsing faster than a sandcastle at high tide. Imagine them as the blue-collar champions who, instead of punching time cards, were harvesting taro and fishing the Pacific with a skill that would make any modern-day angler green with envy. The Achaemenid weren't just chilling on hammocks, sipping coconut water, and waiting for the next big luau. No, they were the ones breaking their backs, literally at times, tending to the land and sea, ensuring there was enough food to go around. They were the original multitaskers, managing tasks that ranged from farming to fishing, all while navigating the social currents dictated by their chiefs. It was less Hakuna Matata and more work hard, stay under the radar. And speaking of coconuts, let's talk about the barter economy that ran the show. In a world where currency was as mystical as unicorns, everything from pigs to woven mats was up for trade. Coconuts were practically the original Bitcoin, a versatile currency that could be traded for anything from fish to the occasional pig. But don't get too excited. Even if you amassed a mountain of coconuts, it wasn't going to buy you a seat at the Chiefs' Council. Power, like a stubborn stain, required more than just nuts and bolts. It needed lineage and clout. Let's bust a myth while we're here. The idea that these societies were some kind of communal utopia where everyone held hands and sang Cumbaya under the stars. Sure, there was a sense of community, but it was far from idyllic. The Achaemenid lived under strict kapu, or sacred laws, that dictated everything from what they could eat to where they could fish. Break one, and you weren't just getting a slap on the wrist. Punishments could be as severe as exile or even death. It was like living in a gated community where the HOA could literally ruin your life. Oh, and let's not forget about the occasional rebellion. Though the Achaemenid were generally seen as loyal subjects, there were times when they had enough. When the chiefs pushed too far, demanding too much labor or tribute, the common folk occasionally decided to shake things up. These uprisings weren't exactly common, but they were a testament to the fact that even in paradise, people had a breaking point. The alley might have had the divine right, but the Achaemenid had sheer numbers, and when pushed, the will to resist. To keep the wheels of society greased, the Achaemenid participated in complex labor systems, such as the ahupua. This ingenious land division system ensured that each community had access to both the mountains and the sea, creating a sustainable way to divvy up resources. Picture a long slice of pie, where one edge touches the coast and the other the mountains, and you'll get the idea. It was a beautifully organized chaos, a logistical feat that could put modern urban planners to shame. And while we're on the subject of logistics, let's talk about the sheer manpower required to build those impressive Polynesian canoes, some as long as 100 feet. Crafting these ocean-going vessels wasn't a solo job. It was a community effort, a symbol of unity and shared purpose. So, the next time you marvel at the engineering genius behind these boats, remember that it was the sweat of the Achaemenid that turned trees into seafaring marvels. Now, here's a nugget of wisdom. While the alley were the face of Polynesian society, the Achaemenid were its beating heart. They were the unsung heroes, the silent majority who, without fanfare or feathered headdresses, kept the machine running. They accepted their place in the hierarchy, but not without the occasional eye roll or whispered grumble. Because let's face it, even in the most structured of societies, a little bit of skepticism goes a long way. So, the next time you're dreaming of a tropical escape, sipping on a piña colada, remember the Achaemenid. They were the ones who truly lived the island life, not just basking in the sun, but toiling under it, making sure the lavish feasts and majestic ceremonies could happen. They were the real deal, the backbone of a society that was as complex as it was captivating. And while their stories might not have the glitter of their chiefs, They're a reminder that history is often written by those who wield the tools, not just the power. And it wasn't just the common folk who kept the wheels of Polynesian society turning. Enter the kahuna, the priestly class, wielding influence with a flair that would make any modern-day influencer envious. The kahuna were the spiritual heavyweights, the arbiters of divine will, and in many ways, the ultimate power brokers of the islands. While the Ali were busy flexing their genealogical muscles, and the Achaemenid were breaking their backs, kahuna were doing what they did best, playing the long game of divine politics. Now, before you conjure up images of serene monks meditating in lotus position, let's set the record straight. The kahuna were far from being mere spiritual counselors. They were the living, breathing intersection between the sacred and the mundane. In a world where religion was as woven into the social fabric as the very grass skirts the locals darned, the kahuna had their fingers in every pie. They were the ones interpreting the signs, reading the skies, and determining when the gods were in a good mood or when they needed appeasing. So, what gave these kahuna their clout? Well, for starters, they had the monopoly on spiritual knowledge. Think of them as the Silicon Valley tech gurus of their day, except their algorithms involved astrology, not AI. They were the gatekeepers of sacred rituals and chants, the keepers of the ancient wisdom that was as prized as any treasure. This knowledge wasn't just handed down like grandma's secret cookie recipe. It was guarded fiercely and passed on through rigorous training. Only those deemed worthy, often by lineage or talent, could join the priestly ranks. And let's not kid ourselves. In a society where divine favor could make or break you, having a kahuna in your corner was like having a direct line to the gods themselves. But while the kahuna were busy interpreting omens, they were also adept at pulling a few political strings. Religion and politics in Polynesia were more intertwined than a pair of teenagers' headphones. The kahuna often operated as advisors to the Ali, guiding them in matters of governance, warfare, and most importantly, how to keep the gods happy and the people in line. It was a delicate dance, balancing the divine with the pragmatic, and the kahuna were masters of the art. They could sway decisions, influence public opinion, and even determine the outcome of wars with a well-timed prophecy or blessing. Now, let's have a chuckle at some of their more eyebrow-raising methods. When it came to divine intervention, the kahuna sometimes had a rather flexible definition of what that meant. Need to rally the troops for a battle. Voila! The gods have spoken through an unusual cloud formation. Want to ensure a plentiful harvest? Better sacrifice a pig or 10 to appease the deity of agriculture. And if the Ali needed a little extra help solidifying their rule, a strategically orchestrated divine vision could do wonders for public morale. Speaking of sacrifices, let's not sugarcoat it. These weren't just symbolic offerings. Human sacrifices were sometimes part of the equation, a grim reminder that the gods' favor came at a steep price. The kahuna were the ones who decreed when such sacrifices were necessary, often claiming it was the only way to restore cosmic balance. It's a chilling thought, but in a society where the line between the mortal and the divine was razor-thin, these rituals were seen as essential to maintaining order. Of course, the kahuna also had their quirks and moments of questionable judgment. Take, for example, the infamous case of the kapu sticks. These were essentially sacred sticks, used to enforce the kapu system, a set of strict laws that governed nearly every aspect of daily life. Break the kapu, and you could find yourself on the business end of divine retribution. But here's the kicker. Sometimes the kahuna could interpret the stick's messages in ways that conveniently aligned with their own agendas. It's like getting a fortune cookie that always tells you exactly what you want to hear, if you happen to be holding the pen that writes the fortunes. Despite their seeming infallibility, the kahuna were as human as the rest of us. They made mistakes, played favorites, and sometimes let power go to their heads. But their role in Polynesian society was undeniable. They were the bridge between the seen and the unseen, the earthly and the divine. And in a world where the favor of the gods was as unpredictable as the ocean tides, the kahuna provided a semblance of certainty, or at least the illusion of it. So, while the Ali strutted their stuff, and the Achaemenid toiled away, the kahuna were busy weaving the spiritual threads that held the tapestry of Polynesian society together. They were the myth makers, the ritual masters, and the power behind the throne. And as we peel back the layers of their influence, we find a world where religion and politics danced a complex tango. a world where the divine was never far from the everyday, and where the kahuna kept everyone guessing, from the highest chief to the humblest fisherman. As we dive deeper into the currents of Polynesian history, we see that the kahuna were more than just the sum of their rituals and chants. They were a testament to the power of belief, the force of tradition, and the sheer audacity of human ingenuity. Whether they were whispering in the ears of chiefs or calling down the wrath of the gods, the kahuna were a force to be reckoned with, a reminder that in the grand play of history, those who control the narrative often wield the greatest power of all. Now, if the kahuna were the ones pulling the spiritual strings, it was the European explorers who yanked on the threads of Polynesian society with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. The first ripple in this cultural collision came with Captain James Cook, who sailed into the Hawaiian Islands in 1778, bringing with him a fleet of ships and a hefty dose of bewilderment. Cook and his crew, with their strange attire and even stranger customs, must have seemed like extraterrestrials landing in a cosmic canoe. When Cook and his crew dropped anchor, they inadvertently set off a series of events that would alter the Polynesian world more profoundly than a plot twist in a soap opera. The Europeans came bearing gifts. Well, if you can call firearms, disease, and a skewed moral compass gifts. With their steel, gunpowder, and germs, they introduced a new dynamic to the islands that was as welcome as a shark in a swimming pool. Let's start with the diseases, those microscopic stowaways that wreaked havoc on the unsuspecting islanders. Smallpox, measles, and influenza arrived like uninvited party crashers, and they packed a punch. The native population, having no immunity to these foreign invaders, was decimated faster than you can say quarantine. Some estimates suggest that in places like Hawaii, the population plummeted by as much as 80% in mere decades. Imagine a society where nearly everyone you know suddenly falls ill, a grim reminder that not all contact is beneficial. And then there were the guns. Before long, these newfangled weapons became the must-have accessory for any self-respecting ally. They transformed warfare from a traditional clash of spears and clubs to a symphony of gunpowder and smoke. Chiefs who could get their hands on firearms found themselves with a tactical advantage that was as unfair as bringing a tank to a knife fight. It was like the Polynesian version of an arms race, with chiefs vying for supremacy in a landscape suddenly altered by the boom of muskets. Of course, the cultural misunderstandings were as plentiful as coconuts on a palm tree. The Europeans often saw the Polynesians through a lens of their own biases, sometimes romanticizing, sometimes demonizing, but always misunderstanding. To the explorers, the islanders' customs, like their intricate tattoos or communal living, seemed exotic, perhaps even primitive. But to the Polynesians, these were the threads of their identity, woven with purpose and meaning that the newcomers couldn't begin to fathom. Take, for instance, the concept of mana, a kind of spiritual power that was as real to the Polynesians as the ocean itself. Europeans, however, often interpreted it as superstition, dismissing it with a wave of their rationalist hand. Yet, this dismissal only underscored their inability to grasp the complex social and spiritual tapestry that mana represented. It's a classic case of cultural myopia, where one side's mysticism is another's reality. But let's not paint the Polynesians as mere passive recipients of European intrusion. Oh no, they had a remarkable knack for adaptation and resilience. While the initial contact was a shock to the system, the islanders soon began to navigate these new waters with an astuteness that would make Machiavelli proud. They learned to play the Europeans' game, leveraging their knowledge and resources to their own ends. Some chiefs formed alliances with foreign powers, using these relationships to bolster their own positions back home. Take King Kamehameha, for example, who used Western weapons and tactics to unite the Hawaiian Islands under his rule by 1810. Kamehameha's savvy blend of diplomacy and military strategy showed that while the Europeans might have brought the tools, it was the Polynesians who often wrote the manual. His reign marked a significant shift in the island's social order, with new technologies and ideas reshaping the landscape as surely as the tides reshape the shore. As colonial powers like Britain, France, and the United States began to eye the islands with the kind of acquisitive interest usually reserved for prime real estate, the stakes were raised. The pressure to modernize, or be left behind, was immense. The Ali found themselves navigating a new world where diplomacy and trade were as important as genealogy and divine favor. The Kahuna, too, had to adapt, finding ways to reconcile age-old traditions with the encroaching tide of Christianity and Western thought. And while we're on the subject of missionaries, let's talk about their role in this unfolding drama. Arriving with the zeal of someone who just discovered kale smoothies, missionaries were intent on saving the souls of the islanders, whether the islanders wanted saving or not. They brought with them new religious ideas, education systems, and an insistence on Western morality that often clashed with traditional Polynesian values. The missionaries' influence was profound, reshaping the island's social fabric and leaving a legacy that was as mixed as a cocktail at a tiki bar. Yet, despite the whirlwind of change, the Polynesians displayed a resilience that was nothing short of remarkable. They managed to hold onto many aspects of their culture, even as they incorporated new elements. Language, dance, and art continued to thrive, albeit in new forms. And while the social order was undoubtedly altered, the core of Polynesian identity remained, a testament to the enduring spirit of a people who have always known how to navigate the open sea. So, as we close this chapter, and not the book, on the impact of European contact, let's remember that history is never a simple tale of victors and vanquished. It's a complex dance, a push and pull of cultures and ideas, where the lines between old and new blur like the horizon at sunset. The story of Polynesia in the age of exploration is one of disruption and adaptation, of loss and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of monumental change, the human spirit can find ways to endure and thrive. And as we look ahead, we'll see that this resilience is a theme that continues to echo through the ages, a testament to the strength of a people who have weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. As the dust settled from the cultural collision with Europeans, Polynesian societies faced a new dawn, a world where tradition and modernity engaged in a delicate tango. While the initial impact was as jarring as a smartphone notification during a meditation session, the islanders didn't just survive. They thrived by embracing the best of both worlds. Fast forward to today, and you'll find Polynesians wielding technology with the same savvy their ancestors used to navigate the Pacific's treacherous waters. It's a balancing act that would make even a tightrope walker envious. In the heart of this modern resurgence lies a remarkable cultural revival. Take the Hawaiian Renaissance of the 1970, for instance, a movement as vibrant as the island's tropical flora. It was a moment when the people of Hawaii, after decades of cultural suppression, began to reclaim their heritage with a fervor that could rival a surf competition. The Hawaiian language, nearly extinct, was revived in schools and homes, proving that words have power even when they're whispered instead of shouted. Today, over 18,000 people speak Hawaiian, a testament to the resilience of a language nearly silenced by history. But let's not forget hula, the iconic dance that's as much a part of Hawaii as sunburned tourists. Once banned by missionaries who deemed it improper, hula has made a spectacular comeback, with festivals like the Merry Monarch Festival drawing global attention. It's more than just a dance. It's a narrative art form that tells the stories of the land and its people, a living connection to a past that refuses to be forgotten. In this way, hula isn't just a performance. It's a declaration of identity, a rhythmic reminder that tradition can be as dynamic as the dancers who bring it to life. Across the Pacific, similar revivals are stirring. In New Zealand, the Maori have embraced technology to preserve their language and culture, creating apps and digital platforms that would make any Silicon Valley startup blush. The Te Reo Maori language, once teetering on the brink, is now spoken by over 150,000 people, a linguistic phoenix rising from colonial ashes. Programs like Kohanga Rio, Language Nests, have been pivotal, offering immersive Maori language education to preschoolers. It's a modern twist on an ancient oral tradition, proving that you can teach an old culture new tricks. Now, let's talk tattoos. Once considered taboo in Western circles, Maori Tamoko tattoos have experienced a renaissance, becoming a symbol of pride and identity rather than rebellion. This resurgence is as intricate as the tattoos themselves, each design a personal history etched in skin. Today's Maori youth are reclaiming Tamoko blending traditional techniques with contemporary styles, a literal embodiment of past meeting present. These tattoos are more than skin-deep. They're a visible narrative of resilience and identity in the face of a globalized world. Speaking of global reach, Polynesian navigational prowess, once the stuff of legend, has found new life through groups like the Polynesian Voyaging Society. Their double-hulled canoe, Hokulea, has sailed thousands of miles across the Pacific, reconnecting islands and people in a way that GPS could only dream of. This modern revival of ancient navigation techniques isn't just about celebrating the past. It's a powerful reminder of the ingenuity that kept these societies afloat for centuries. The Hokulea's voyages are a testament to the enduring spirit of exploration that defines Polynesian culture, proving that while technology has evolved, the stars still guide those who know how to read them. But let's not romanticize this cultural resurgence as a simple return to roots. It's more like a complex braid, weaving together threads of tradition and modernity. Take the Samoan practice of Fa'afafine, for example, a gender identity that defies Western binaries and has existed for centuries. In today's world, Fa'afafine are navigating their identities with the same grace their ancestors used to navigate the open sea, blending traditional roles with modern expressions of gender. It's a powerful reminder that Polynesian societies have long embraced fluidity and adaptability, qualities that modern societies are just beginning to appreciate. Economically, Polynesians are also making waves. Tourism, once a colonial export, has become a lucrative industry managed by the islanders themselves. In Fiji, tourism accounts for 38% of GDP, with local initiatives ensuring that the benefits trickle down to the communities that need them. It's a delicate dance, balancing economic growth with cultural preservation, but one that the islanders are navigating with the same dexterity that once steered canoes through stormy seas. Let's not overlook the environmental stewardship that has been a cornerstone of Polynesian life for generations. In an era where climate change threatens island nations, Polynesians are at the forefront of sustainable practices, blending ancient wisdom with modern science. The concept of kaishiakatanga, or guardianship, is as relevant today as it was centuries ago, guiding efforts to protect the oceans that have sustained these cultures for millennia. It's a poignant reminder that while the world races forward, sometimes the best solutions are the ones rooted in the past. And while we're on the subject of blending the old with the new, let's talk about how technology is being harnessed to keep these traditions alive. From digital archives preserving oral histories to social media platforms connecting Polynesians across the globe, technology has become a tool for cultural preservation rather than erosion. It's a modern marvel that would surely make the ancestors nod in approval, knowing that their stories are being told in ways they could have never imagined. In the grand tapestry of history, Polynesian societies have shown us that tradition and modernity aren't mutually exclusive. They're two sides of the same coin, a dynamic duo that, when balanced, can create something truly remarkable. The Polynesians' ability to adapt and thrive in a changing world is a testament to the strength and resilience of human culture. It's a reminder that while the tides of history may ebb and flow, the spirit of a people can endure, guiding them like a steady North Star through the uncharted waters of the future. So, as you sit back and digest this journey through time, let the legacy of the Polynesians remind you that history isn't just a series of events. It's a living, breathing narrative that continues to shape our world today. Whether it's the whisper of ancient chants carried on the wind or the rhythmic beat of a digital drum, the Polynesians have shown us that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the stories we tell, the dances we perform, and the paths we choose to navigate. And in a world constantly in flux, that's a legacy worth celebrating. The Abbasid Caliphate, a grand saga of power, intrigue, and Baghdad's version of a startup boom. Back in 750 CE, the Abbasids weren't just flipping the page on a new chapter. They were burning the whole book written by the Umayyad Caliphate. Let's start with a little context. The Umayyads, ruling since 661 CE, had a knack for making enemies. They were like that one kid at school who somehow managed to annoy everyone, but still got invited to all the parties. Based in Damascus, the Umayyads were seen as an exclusive club for Arab elites, leaving many of their non-Arab Muslim subjects feeling like they were stuck outside the velvet rope. Enter the Abbasids, stage left, with promises of inclusion and justice, two words that make for great campaign slogans. They claimed descent from Muhammad's uncle, Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, which gave them a solid family pedigree, like a medieval version of having the right last name in Hollywood. With a little help from the Persian Mawali, non-Arab Muslims who were tired of being treated like second-class citizens, the Abbasids orchestrated a revolution that would make even the most dramatic of reality shows seem tame. The Abbasid Revolution was a mix of secret meetings, betrayals, and battles, culminating in the defeat of the Umayyads at the Battle of the Zab in 750 CE. If this had been a modern action movie, this would be the part with slow-motion shots and dramatic music. Now, let's talk about Baghdad. The Umayyads might have had Damascus, but the Abbasids had bigger plans. They moved their capital to Baghdad in 762 CE, and not just because they were tired of the Syrian sun. Baghdad was strategically placed between the Tigris and Euphrates, which might sound like a realtor's pitch, but it genuinely made it a hub for trade, culture, and a melting pot of ideas. Think of Baghdad as the Silicon Valley of its day, but with fewer tech billionaires and more scholars. Under the Abbasids, the city grew rapidly, with some estimates suggesting a population nearing 1 million people at its peak. That's right, medieval Baghdad was the place to be, long before New York earned the title of the city that never sleeps. Economically, the Abbasids were riding high. They capitalized on trade routes stretching from China to the Mediterranean, making Baghdad the bustling heart of a vast empire. Caravans laden with silk, spices, and knowledge, because yes, ideas were a hot commodity poured into the city. The Abbasid economy was as diverse as the city itself, with agriculture, manufacturing, and trade thriving. The Abbasids even minted their own currency, the dinar, which became as synonymous with wealth as having a black card today. But let's not be too misty-eyed about the Abbasid rise. They were as adept at wielding power as they were at spreading it. While they preached inclusion, their rule was no idyllic utopia. Power struggles were as common as street vendors, and the caliphs knew that staying on top required the kind of political maneuvering that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. The Abbasids were also smart enough to know the value of brains. They established the House of Wisdom in the 9th century, a place that was less about cozy reading nooks and more about serious scholarly pursuits. This was where some of the greatest minds of the time gathered to translate texts from Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit into Arabic, effectively giving the world a knowledge upgrade. Imagine the House of Wisdom as the world's first massive open online course, but without the internet and with way more scrolls. So, there you have it, the meteoric rise of the Abbasids, from revolutionaries to rulers, transforming Baghdad into a beacon of culture and commerce. But remember, while the stories of grandeur and intellect are true, they came wrapped in the harsh realities of political power and control. The Abbasids certainly knew how to throw a party, but they also knew when to bring out the bouncers. The Abbasid Caliphate, the original cultural influencer of the medieval world, where Baghdad wasn't just a city, it was the place to be seen. Picture this. It's the 9th century, and the city is bustling like a medieval Times Square, minus the neon lights and with a lot more camels. This era, often dubbed the Golden Age of the Abbasids, was like the Renaissance before the Renaissance was cool. Under the Abbasids, Baghdad transformed into a cosmic epicenter of culture, science, and trade, a veritable VIP lounge where the guest list included some of the greatest minds of the time. Let's start with one of the rock stars of this intellectual party, Al-Khwarizmi, the man who decided that math needed more letters. Yes, he's the guy you can thank for algebra, a word that sends most high school students into a cold sweat. Al-Khwarizmi wasn't just a math whiz. He was the Leonardo da Vinci of his day, dabbling in everything from astronomy to geography. His work on algebra wasn't just a brain teaser for future generations. It was a mathematical revolution. He published Al-Kitab al-Muqtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala around 820 CE. Try saying that 5 times fast, which laid the groundwork for solving quadratic equations, making him the medieval equivalent of a STEM superstar. But it wasn't all numbers and equations in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, the city's intellectual hotspot. Oh no, This was where scholars turned ancient manuscripts into mind-expanding knowledge, translating works from Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit into Arabic, the lingua franca of the learned. It was like the world's first TED conference, except with more scrolls and less PowerPoint. The scholars here were the OG influencers, shaping the intellectual landscape of the time. If they had Instagram, their follower count would have been off the charts. Meanwhile, trade routes were the veins through which the lifeblood of the Abbasid economy flowed. Picture caravans trudging along the Silk Road, laden with silk, spices, and ideas. The Abbasids had their fingers in pies stretching from China to Spain. They were the Jeff Bezos of their time, except their delivery network involved a lot more camels and a lot fewer drones. The caliphs knew that economic prosperity wasn't just about hoarding wealth. It was about creating a global network of exchange. The dinar, their currency, was as gold as their age, accepted from the bustling souks of Baghdad to the bazaars of North Africa. Now, you might think this was some idyllic utopia where scholars roamed free and camels danced in the streets, but hold onto your turbans. The Abbasid court was a den of political intrigue that would make Game of Thrones look like a day at the park. Power struggles were practically a spectator sport, and caliphs had to keep one eye on their books and the other on their back. The political chess game was fierce. Everyone wanted a piece of the pie, or at least a seat at the table where the pie was being sliced. Social dynamics were also a complex tapestry. While the Abbasids preached inclusion and intellectual exchange, reality was a bit more nuanced. Non-Muslims, including Christians and Jews, were allowed to live and work in the Caliphate, but had to pay a special tax called the jizya. And while the House of Wisdom was a beacon of knowledge, it was also a fortress of elite intellectualism, where only the best and brightest got to play. The caliphs were patrons of the arts, but they were also shrewd rulers who knew that knowledge was power, and power needed a tight grip. Yet, for all their political maneuvering, the Abbasids couldn't entirely escape the looming shadows of internal dissent and external threats. While Baghdad basked in its golden glow, the empire itself was a patchwork quilt of cultures, religions, and languages, a diversity that was both its strength and its Achilles heel. The Caliphate's borders were as sprawling as they were vulnerable, and keeping such a vast empire under control was like playing a game of whack-a-mole with rebellions popping up faster than you could say, Caliph. Despite the challenges, the Abbasids left an indelible mark on history, creating a legacy of intellectual achievement that would echo through the ages. As the 9th century rolled on, Baghdad stood as a testament to what could be achieved when cultures collided and collaborated. It was a time when the exchange of ideas was just as valuable as the exchange of goods, and the thirst for knowledge was as insatiable as the desire for power. So, as we leave this chapter of the Abbasid Golden Age, remember that while the myths of grandeur are captivating, the reality was a vibrant, messy, and utterly fascinating tapestry of human endeavor. The Abbasids knew how to throw a party, but they also understood the complex dance of power, culture, and commerce, the very dance that kept their empire spinning for centuries. And as we delve deeper into their story, keep in mind that the glittering facade of history often hides as much as it reveals. Stay tuned, because the Abbasid saga is far from over. While the Abbasid Caliphate was busy polishing its golden crown, the 9th century had other plans, like giving it a few dents and a touch of tarnish. Beneath the glittering facade of intellectual and cultural prowess, the Abbasids were grappling with the kind of political intrigue that would make a soap opera seem straightforward. Picture a sprawling empire held together by ambition, a dash of charisma, and a hefty dose of anxiety about keeping it all from unraveling. Now, let's get to the nitty-gritty of the political scene. The Caliphate, like an overworked juggler, was trying to keep too many balls in the air. Regional powers were starting to flex their muscles, each one thinking, why should Baghdad have all the fun? Enter the rise of local dynasties like the Chelunids in Egypt and the Saffarids in Persia. These guys were like the startup founders who realized they didn't need to report to corporate headquarters anymore. They were paying lip service to the Abbasids while quietly building their own empires. By the late 9th century, the Abbasids were like the central government that couldn't quite keep the states in line. Sound familiar? And then there were the mercenaries. Oh, the mercenaries, the medieval equivalent of hiring freelancers. The Abbasids, realizing their army was stretched thinner than a piece of baklava, increasingly relied on mercenary forces to maintain control. These hired hands were often Turkic soldiers, known as gilmen. Now, these weren't the kind of guys you'd want to cross. They were fiercely loyal to their paychecks, not necessarily to the Caliph. It's a bit like inviting a wolf to guard your sheep because you've run out of options. They'll do the job, but you'd better keep an eye on them. The Zanj rebellion, which kicked off in 869 CE, serves as a stark example of the social tensions bubbling beneath the surface. The Zanj were African slaves working in brutal conditions on the salt marshes of southern Iraq. Led by a charismatic figure named Ali ibn Muhammad, they rose up in revolt, turning the region into a tinderbox of unrest for nearly 14 years. This wasn't just a minor skirmish. It was a full-blown rebellion that threatened the very fabric of Abbasid control. The Caliphate eventually quashed the uprising, but not without significant bloodshed and a serious hit to its prestige. Historians estimate tens of thousands died, proof that maintaining an empire is as costly as it is glamorous. These kinds of internal strife reflect the harsh realities of an empire that was anything but a monolithic Islamic utopia. The romanticized notion of a unified caliphate crumbles under the weight of its own complexities. What we see instead is a patchwork empire, knitted together by a mix of diplomacy, force, and the occasional generous bribe. The Abbasids might have talked a big game about unity, but on the ground, it was more of a patchwork quilt held together by threads of necessity. Meanwhile, the House of Wisdom continued to shine as a beacon of knowledge, but even this intellectual oasis wasn't immune to the empire's troubles. As resources were redirected to put out political fires, patronage for scholars could be as unpredictable as medieval weather. Funding for translations and scientific endeavors ebbed and flowed with the Caliphate's fortunes. Even the brightest stars in Baghdad's intellectual galaxy had to navigate the shifting sands of politics and patronage. As the 9th century wound down, the Abbasid Caliphate was a paradox, an empire of grandeur and decay, of enlightenment and unrest. The caliphs were still dining in opulence, while the empire's edges frayed like an old tapestry. This was a time when the Abbasids had to acknowledge that their golden age was starting to show its age lines. The cracks were no longer hairline fractures, but gaping fissures that required more than just a political band-aid. The Abbasids were learning the hard way that maintaining an empire was a bit like trying to keep a sandcastle intact during high tide. Standing on the shores of history, they could only watch as the waves of change lapped at their feet, threatening to wash away the foundations they had built. Yet, despite the challenges, they managed to hold onto power, even if by the skin of their teeth. So, as we pause at this juncture in the Abbasid saga, remember that the allure of their story lies not just in their achievements, but also in their struggles. It's a tale of human ambition and frailty, of dreams that soared and sometimes fell short. The Abbasids weren't just the architects of a golden age, they were also the reluctant custodians of its decline. As we move forward, keep in mind that history, much like the Abbasid Empire, is never as simple as it seems. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises more twists, turns, and the occasional surprise guest appearance in this historical drama. As the Abbasid saga trudged into the 10th century, the empire began to resemble a once mighty beast, showing its age. The golden sheen of Baghdad was still there, sure, but it was increasingly weighed down by a patchwork of political squabbles and economic woes that would make a modern economist break into a cold sweat. You see, running an empire isn't all palatial parties and poetic proclamations. Sometimes it's just dirty, costly work. Let's dive into the messy economics first. Back in the heyday, the Abbasid taxation system was like a well-oiled machine, raking in the dirhams and dinars from a sprawling landscape. But by the 10th century, the wheels were coming off. Tax revenues, which once soared into millions of dirhams, began to dwindle faster than a teenager's interest in chores. According to some records, tax income in regions like Iraq plummeted by over 50% from its zenith, transforming the treasury from a dragon's hoard to a piggy bank filled with IOUs. Why the financial nosedive? Picture a tax collector trying to squeeze a stone. The once bountiful lands were ravaged by mismanagement and rebellion, leaving them as fruitful as a desert in drought. Add to that the fact that local governors were increasingly pocketing the proceeds rather than forwarding them to Baghdad. It was a classic case of what happens in Basra stays in Basra. The central government was left scrambling for cash, like a sitcom dad just realizing his wallet's been raided by the kids. And then there was military spending. Oh boy, if you thought the tax situation was a headache, military expenditures were the migraine. Maintaining an army to keep the restless provinces in check wasn't a cheap affair. Estimates suggest that a large chunk of the budget, somewhere around 60%, was funneled into military coffers. Hiring mercenaries, primarily those oh-so-reliable Turkic soldiers, was a bit like hiring a bouncer who might just decide to take over the club. These gillmen were crucial but costly, and their loyalty was as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. While Baghdad was struggling to keep its financial head above water, rival dynasties were circling like sharks smelling blood. Enter the Buyids, a Shia dynasty from Daylam in northern Iran, who were more than happy to step into the power vacuum. By 945 C, the Buyids had effectively put the Abbasid caliphs under house arrest, reducing them to figureheads who had as much real power as a wax statue. The caliphs still had the titles and the fancy robes, but the Buyids held the real reins of power. It was like being the king in a chess game where your opponent has already checkmated you, but lets you keep playing for the fun of it. Just when the Abbasids thought things couldn't get any more precarious, the Seljuks swaggered onto the scene in the 11th century. These were Turkish nomads who decided they liked the idea of an empire and wanted a slice of it for themselves. By 1055 C, they had muscled into Baghdad, with their leader Tughril Beg being proclaimed Sultan, a title that signified authority over the Caliphate's worldly matters. The Seljuks were like that over-enthusiastic co-worker who takes over your project and gets all the credit. Annoying, but undeniably effective. Under the Seljuks, the caliphs were little more than marionettes, their strings pulled by the sultans who actually made the decisions. It was a curious case of the caliphs being prisoners in their own palace, a setting ripe for irony if there ever was one. They were still the nominal leaders of the Muslim world, but their decrees had the impact of a whisper in a hurricane. Think of it as a medieval version of a constitutional monarchy, but with a lot more swords and a bit less ceremony. As the empire fragmented, the once proud Abbasid Caliphate became a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. Regional powers like the Fatimids in Egypt and the Umayyads in Spain no longer saw the Caliph in Baghdad as the big boss. These rival dynasties were like rebellious teenagers who decided they were too cool for school and set up their own clubs with slightly different rules. The Abbasid decline wasn't just a tale of political intrigue and fiscal folly. It was a stark reminder of the impermanence of power. An empire that had once spanned continents now struggled to control its own backyard. The grand caliphs, who once dictated the fate of countless souls, were reduced to ceremonial roles, their authority eroded like sandcastles facing an inexorable tide. Yet, amid all this chaos, the Abbasid story continues to captivate. It's a narrative of grandeur tarnished by hubris, of ambition outpaced by reality. The lesson here, even empires that shine brightest can stumble into the shadows. As we leave the Abbasids to their tangled web of alliances, remember that history is rarely a straight line. It's a series of twists and turns, of peaks and valleys, and sometimes of mighty caliphs turned hapless puppets in a game that's as old as time itself. Stay tuned, because the Abbasids aren't quite done yet. They've still got a few surprises up their sleeves. And yet, the Abbasids, like a classic rock band past their prime, had one last tour left in them, whether they liked it or not. By the 13th century, the Abbasid caliphs were still hanging on in Baghdad, a city that had once been the glittering jewel of the Islamic world, but was now more like a faded tiara. The caliphs had become masters of surviving on scraps of power, a skill that would soon face the ultimate test. Enter the Mongols, stage right, like a thunderstorm on the horizon. Genghis Khan's successors had taken a liking to the idea of world domination, and under Hulagu Khan, they set their sights on the Middle East. In 1258, Baghdad was about to meet its reckoning, and not even a millennium's worth of glory could save it from the Mongol onslaught. Hulagu's forces, numbering around 150, 000 strong, approached the city with a determination that would make a bulldozer look gentle. The Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mustassim, was ill-prepared for this level of annihilation, his military strength about as sturdy as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The siege began in January 1258, and it was over in a matter of weeks. The Mongols, not known for their subtlety, breached the city defenses with a force that would have made a battering ram blush. By February 10th, Baghdad had fallen. The once mighty city, home to perhaps 1 million souls in its heyday, was reduced to ash and rubble. Contemporary chroniclers describe the casualty figures with a horror that echoes through the ages. Estimates suggest anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million inhabitants perished in the slaughter, a statistic that reads like a grim inventory of medieval apocalypse. But it wasn't just lives lost, it was the obliteration of an era. The House of Wisdom, that beacon of knowledge and culture, was destroyed, its precious manuscripts and scrolls tossed into the Tigris. They say the river ran black with ink for days, a poetic yet tragic symbol of a rich intellectual legacy drowned by the deluge of conquest. Baghdad's libraries, once the envy of the world, became kindling for history's relentless march forward. The economic impact was equally catastrophic. Trade ground to a halt, and the bustling bazaars that once buzzed with merchants became ghostly reminders of prosperity lost. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they erased. In the aftermath, the Abbasid Caliphate was a shell of its former self. Al-Mustassim met a grim fate, reportedly trampled to death, a Mongol execution method that eschewed spilling royal blood, because even in brutality there were rules. The Caliphate's end marked the close of a chapter in Islamic history that had been as vibrant as it was volatile. What had begun with an overthrow of the Umayyads in 750 CE now lay in ruins, reminding us that even the grandest of empires can end not with a whisper, but a thunderous roar. Yet, amid the desolation, the Abbasids left a legacy that refused to be extinguished. Their contributions to science, culture, and knowledge had lit a flame that continued to burn, even in the darkest of times. The intellectual inheritance of the Abbasid Golden Age inspired minds across Europe and the Islamic world for centuries to come. While the physical empire crumbled, its cultural and scientific achievements endured, a testament to the enduring power of ideas over armies. And here's the kicker. History, in its infinite irony, seems to love a good rerun. Tale of the Abbasids serves as a cautionary epic of ambition tempered by hubris, of unity tested by division. It's a story that resonates with the echoes of empires before and after, each believing they could defy the inevitable ebb and flow of power. The Abbasids, like many before them, learned that the sands of time are relentless, shifting beneath even the mightiest of thrones. So, as we close the book on the Abbasid Caliphate, let's reflect on the lessons it offers. Empires rise, empires fall, but their stories, filled with triumphs and tragedies, endure. Perhaps that's the most enduring legacy of all, the reminder that no empire is immune to the capricious whims of history, and that the greatest monuments are built not of stone, but of ideas. As we ponder the Abbasid saga, we are left with the bittersweet realization that history, with all its grandeur and folly, is a tale as old as time, and one that will undoubtedly continue to repeat itself. Cyrus the Great didn't just stumble upon greatness like a kid finding a coin on the sidewalk. No, he crafted his empire with the precision of a master chess player, except the board was 2 million square miles wide and the pieces, entire civilizations. The year was 559 BC, and Cyrus was just warming up. He wasn't merely a king, he was the king of kings, the kind of guy who'd make even your most ambitious friend feel like a slacker. Now, let's talk about his home turf, Persia. Back then, it wasn't the powerhouse we know from history books. It was a patchwork of rival tribes and petty kings, a bit like a high school cafeteria full of cliques, each vying for dominance. Enter Cyrus, ready to unify these squabbling factions with a bit of charisma and a whole lot of strategy. He was born in Anshan, a city with a name sounding like it was plucked from a fantasy novel, but was very real, located in what is now Iran. And it was here that he began to lay the groundwork for what would become one of the most significant empires in history. Cyrus had a knack for conquest, but not the kind that leaves scorched earth and bitter enemies. No, he was more into the conquer and chill methodology. When he took over the Medes in 550 BC, he didn't just steamroll them. He absorbed their culture, their army, and even their bureaucracy. It was like a corporate merger, but with more spears and fewer PowerPoint slides. This approach not only expanded his territory, but also ensured that he had a loyal base to build upon as he moved westward. Expanding an empire isn't just about military might, it's also about the fine art of diplomacy. Cyrus was a master at this game, too. He knew when to use the carrot and when to wield the stick. For instance, when he turned his sights on Lydia in 547 BC, he didn't just rely on brute force. He exploited the weaknesses of King Croesus, the kind of guy who'd make Elon Musk's wealth seem quaint. Croesus was known for his vast riches, but Cyrus saw through the gold-plated facade and struck swiftly, incorporating Lydia into his growing empire. It wasn't all sunshine and seamless annexations, though. Cyrus had to deal with the occasional rebellion and dissent, as any empire builder would. But here's the kicker. He was often seen as a liberator by those he conquered. Take Babylon, for example. In 539 BC, Cyrus marched into the city and was welcomed with open arms. The Babylonian population was tired of their previous ruler, Nabonidus, and Cyrus played the role of savior to perfection. He even went so far as to allow religious freedom and return sacred objects to conquered peoples, actions that were as radical then as they are sensible now. Cyrus's reputation as a benevolent leader wasn't just a lucky coincidence or a case of historically flattering lighting. He worked at it, crafting a narrative that would endure through the ages. Was he a genuinely nice guy or a master of ancient spin? Probably a bit of both. His famous cylinder, often hailed as the first charter of human rights, paints him as the ultimate good guy ruler. But let's not forget, Cyrus was still an emperor with an appetite for expansion. The difference was, he knew how to wrap his ambitions in a cloak of benevolence, making his conquests feel more like invitations to a better life. By the time Cyrus had his empire stretching from the Balkans to the Indus Valley, he had not only reshaped the geopolitical landscape, but had also set the stage for future empires. He was the blueprint, the arg. His ability to govern a multicultural empire with relative peace was a feat that would be envied by many a ruler after him, not least of which were the Romans, who borrowed a page or two from his playbook. So, as we ponder the rise of the Achaemenid Empire and its mastermind, let's recognize the duality of Cyrus the Great. He was both a conqueror and a visionary, a man who understood that an empire built solely on force was a sandcastle waiting for the tide. Instead, he laid down foundations that would last long after his reign, proving that sometimes the mightiest sword is a well-written story. But where Cyrus laid down the empire's roots, it was his successor, Darius the Great, who transformed it into a finely tuned machine that spanned 3 continents. If Cyrus was the visionary architect, Darius was the meticulous engineer, the kind of guy who'd have an alphabetized spice rack and a budget spreadsheet for his vacation. Picture this, an empire stretching from the scorching sands of Egypt to the lush valleys of the Indus, all humming along like a well-oiled chariot. But how did he manage this sprawling behemoth without the help of emails or GPS? Enter the Royal Road, a feat of engineering that would make even modern city planners weep with envy. This was no ordinary road, mind you. Stretching over 600 miles from Sardis to Susa, it was the ancient equivalent of a superhighway, complete with rest stops in the form of way stations every 15 miles. Think of it as the Achaemenid Empire's version of Route 66, but with more camels and fewer diners. The Royal Road wasn't just a path through the wilderness. It was the Empire's bloodstream, facilitating rapid communication, troop movements, and trade. Couriers could cover the entire length in just 9 days, a speed that would make even Amazon Prime blush. Herodotus, the ancient historian, marveled at the efficiency of these couriers, claiming, "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." Sound familiar? It should. It's the unofficial motto of the United States Postal Service. Talk about a legacy, but a road alone doesn't keep an empire running. Darius knew that to unify such a diverse domain, he needed more than just physical infrastructure. He needed economic cohesion. Enter the Daric, named after the man himself, a golden coin that became the empire's standard currency. The Daric was a game changer. a shiny emblem of unity in an empire teeming with different cultures and languages. It was minted at a time when bartering was still the norm in many parts of the world, giving the Persians a distinct economic advantage. With the Darek, Darius essentially handed his people a universal translator for trade, smoothing the jagged edges of economic fragmentation and making cross-empire commerce as slick as a snake oil salesman at a county fair. Of course, creating a unified currency wasn't just about making trade easier. It was about power, plain and simple. By controlling the minting and circulation of currency, Darius could exert economic influence over his subjects, subtly reminding them who held the purse strings. It's like being the only one with a Netflix password during a lockdown, a position of unassailable authority. Now, let's talk about bureaucracy, the unsung hero of empire management. Darius was something of a pioneer here, creating a system that was the ancient equivalent of hiring a personal assistant, albeit one with 1,000 hands. He divided the empire into 20 provinces, or satrapies, each overseen by a governor, or satrap, if you want to get fancy. These satraps were the eyes and ears of the king, tasked with maintaining order, collecting taxes, and ensuring the empire's laws were upheld. They were like the regional managers in a vast corporate empire, only with more swords and less middle management ennui. But Darius didn't just hand out these positions willy-nilly. Oh no, he understood the delicate balance of power and the importance of checks and balances. Each satrap was watched over by military commanders and royal secretaries, a bit like having your boss's boss, and HR all breathing down your neck. It was a system designed to keep power in check and prevent any one satrap from getting too big for their britches. The result, an empire that ran like a souped-up chariot, able to respond quickly to crises and maintain stability across its vast expanse. Yet, as impressive as Darius's innovations were, they weren't just the result of a savvy ruler with a penchant for organization. They were born out of necessity. The Achaemenid Empire was a vast mosaic of cultures, languages, and religions, a deliciously chaotic soup that could easily boil over without careful management. Darius's reforms were the ladle that kept things from spilling, ensuring that the empire didn't just survive, but thrived. So, as we marvel at the logistical marvel that was the Achaemenid Empire under Darius the Great, let's not forget the human element, the ambition, the ingenuity, and yes, the occasional ruthlessness that drove these innovations. This was an empire forged from the minds of men who understood that power was not just about conquest, but about control. And in a world where the wheel was still a novel concept, that was nothing short of revolutionary. In the grand tapestry of history, Darius's reign stands out not just because of the empire's size or wealth, but because of the systems he put in place. Systems that allowed a diverse array of peoples to coexist under a single banner, proving that sometimes the most impressive feats of empire aren't the battles won or the lands conquered, but the everyday miracles of governance that keep the wheels turning. And with that, we leave Darius still tinkering with his empire, a master of logistics and innovation, setting the stage for the next act in this grand historical drama. Stay tuned, because the story of the Achaemenid Empire is far from over. As Darius fine-tuned his bureaucratic machine, the Achaemenid Empire reached its cultural and political peak, much like a rock band at the height of its fame. Enter Persepolis, the empire's crown jewel, a city so grand it would make even the most opulent Las Vegas casino look like a roadside motel. Yet, despite its dazzling facade, Persepolis was a complex mix of grandeur and gritty reality, a place where the empire's multicultural ethos and its economic realities danced a curious tango. Persepolis wasn't just a city. It was a statement, a declaration of the Achaemenid Empire's power and sophistication. Founded by Darius around 515 BC, it wasn't just a place to crash after a long day of governing. No, this was the empire's ceremonial capital, a site where opulence met ambition on a colossal scale. Picture massive stone columns soaring 60 feet high, adorned with intricate carvings depicting Persian soldiers, mythical creatures, and the occasional homage to the empire's many tributaries. The Appadana, the grand audience hall, could house 10,000 guests, a fact that would make even the most seasoned party planner break into a cold sweat. But let's not get swept away by the grandeur without peeking behind the curtain. Sure, Persepolis was a dazzling spectacle, but it didn't come cheap. The city's construction was a multi-generational endeavor, draining the empire's coffers like a leaky bucket. The labor force consisted not of enslaved masses, as some might romanticize, but of a paid workforce that included skilled artisans from across the empire. This was multiculturalism in action, craftsmen from Egypt, Babylon, and beyond, all contributing to this architectural marvel. Yet the cost of such a project was staggering, a testament to the empire's vast wealth and its leaders' insatiable appetite for glory. Now, let's talk about the multicultural policy that underpinned this vast empire, a progressive approach by ancient standards, but one laced with pragmatism. The Achaemenids understood that ruling a diverse empire required more than just force. It demanded respect for the myriad cultures and traditions within its borders. This wasn't some ancient version of a corporate diversity initiative. It was a shrewd strategy to maintain peace and loyalty among the empire's subjects. The empire's leaders allowed local customs and religions to flourish, recognizing that contented subjects were less likely to rebel. It was a balancing act, like spinning plates on sticks, but it worked, at least most of the time. This policy of tolerance wasn't just about avoiding uprisings. It was also about creating a rich tapestry of cultural exchange. In Persepolis, you could find Egyptian hieroglyphs alongside Babylonian cuneiform, and Greek traders rubbing elbows with Indian merchants. The empire served as a crossroads of ideas, a melting pot of innovation that would shape the ancient world. Of course, this cultural fusion wasn't just about philosophical exchanges over tea. It was also about commerce, plain and simple. The more the empire's cultures interacted, the more trade flourished, filling the coffers of the Persian kings. But was this multicultural utopia all it seemed? Hardly. Beneath the surface lay tensions and rivalries that could erupt at any moment. The Achaemenid policy of tolerance was a double-edged sword, fostering both harmony and friction. Different languages, religions, and customs coexisted under the imperial umbrella, but they also competed for influence and resources. The empire's leaders had to walk a tightrope, balancing the diverse interests of their subjects while ensuring their own power remained unchallenged. It was a high-stakes game, one that required a deft touch and an occasional iron fist. As we marvel at the grandeur of Persepolis and the multicultural policy of the Achaemenid Empire, it's tempting to paint a rosy picture of enlightened rulers guiding their people toward a harmonious future. But let's not kid ourselves. This was an empire built on power, and power is rarely as benevolent as it appears. The Achaemenids were masters of spin, wrapping their ambitions in a cloak of progressivism while keeping a watchful eye on any potential dissent. It was a strategy that worked for a time, allowing the empire to thrive and Persepolis to shine like a beacon of Persian might. Yet, as with all great empires, the seeds of decline were sown amidst the triumphs. The costs of maintaining such a vast and diverse domain were enormous, and even the richest treasury has its limits. Persepolis, with its stunning architecture and cultural vibrancy, was both a symbol of the empire's zenith and a harbinger of its eventual downfall. The very policies that allowed the Achaemenid Empire to flourish also laid the groundwork for challenges that would test its resilience. In true historical fashion, Persepolis stands as a testament to the heights of human ambition and the complexities of power. It's a reminder that behind every grand facade lies a story of struggle, compromise, and, let's be honest, a fair bit of chaos. The Achaemenid Empire at its zenith was nothing short of a monumental achievement, a sprawling mosaic of peoples and cultures held together by the vision and cunning of its rulers. But as we peer into the grandeur of Persepolis, we must remember that even the mightiest empires are built on shifting sands. So, as we leave Persepolis, with its towering columns and echoes of ancient splendor, let's not forget the lessons it offers. The Achaemenid Empire, in all its complexity, was a reflection of the human condition, a blend of ambition, innovation, and the eternal dance of power. And while the story of this great empire is far from over, we've seen enough to appreciate the intricate web that held it all together. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Achaemenid Empire is about to take an intriguing turn. As the curtain falls on the grandeur of Persepolis, let's pivot to the empire's next act, where the spotlight is on Xerxes' eye. a ruler who inherited not just the throne, but a sprawling empire teetering on the edge of its own ambition. Xerxes might have thought he was stepping into a well-oiled machine, but he was more like a new CEO walking into a company with a shiny facade and a few skeletons in the closet. The Achaemenid Empire was vast, yes, but it was also as unwieldy as a cat-herding contest. Xerxes, son of Darius the Great, took the throne in 486 BC with high hopes and perhaps a touch of hubris. After all, who wouldn't feel a bit invincible ruling over an empire that seemed to stretch as far as the eye could see? But Xerxes quickly discovered that managing such an empire was like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. The empire's sheer size was both its greatest strength and its Achilles' heel, a reality that would soon become painfully clear. One of the first cracks in the empire's foundation appeared in Egypt, a region that had never been too keen on Persian rule. In 486 BC, just as Xerxes was getting comfortable on his throne, the Egyptians decided they'd had enough and launched a rebellion. Xerxes, not one to tolerate dissent, crushed the revolt with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. But suppressing rebellion was like playing whack-a-mole. Every time you hit one, another popped up, this time in Babylon. The Babylonians, always the overachievers when it came to revolts, rose up twice, once in 484 BC and again in 482 BC, only to be brutally subdued each time. Now, if quashing rebellions was the empire's version of a pesky side quest, then the Greco-Persian Wars were the main storyline that would test Xerxes' mettle. Let's dive into one of history's most celebrated showdowns, the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC. Picture it, a narrow pass in Greece, 300 Spartans led by King Leonidas, and an army of Persians so vast that, according to legend, their arrows could blot out the sun. Sounds epic, right? Well, let's sprinkle in some reality. For starters, the Persian army wasn't the million-strong horde Hollywood loves to portray. Herodotus, that ancient gossip columnist, claimed it was 6 million. But historians, armed with a bit more skepticism, put the number closer to 100, 000 to 150, 000, a formidable force, but not the human tsunami of legend. As for the Spartans, yes, there were 300 of them, but they were backed by around 7,000 Greek allies, a detail often lost in the retelling. This wasn't just a Spartan stand, it was a coalition effort. The Greeks, under Leonidas, chose Thermopylae for its strategic advantage. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a bottleneck in a video game, where numbers count for less and strategy for more. For 3 days, the Greeks held their ground, a testament to their discipline and the natural fortifications of the pass. But a traitorous local, Ephialtes, showed the Persians a secret path around the pass, leading to the Greeks' eventual defeat. The romantic notion of a last stand against insurmountable odds is compelling, but let's be honest, it was also a tactical blunder of epic proportions. Meanwhile, Xerxes, watching from his throne of war, was learning that conquering Greece wasn't going to be the walk in the park his advisors had promised. The Battle of Salamis soon followed, where the Persian navy faced off against the Greeks in the cramped waters of the Saronic Gulf. The Greeks, led by the cunning Athenian Themistocles, lured the Persian fleet into the narrow straits, where their numbers became a liability rather than advantage. The result? A resounding Greek victory that sent Xerxes packing back to Persia, his dreams of conquest as shattered as his fleet. The Greco-Persian Wars weren't just about clashing armies and clever strategies. They were a colossal drain on the empire's resources. The costs of these campaigns were astronomical, stretching the empire's treasury thinner than a catwalk model. Maintaining a war machine of this scale wasn't a matter of pocket change. It was a financial black hole. And as we know, even the deepest pockets have limits. Back on the home front, the empire was grappling with its own set of problems. The multicultural tapestry that had once been its strength was now a source of tension. The policy of tolerance, while noble in theory, was fraying at the edges. Local customs clashed with imperial policies, and the satraps, those regional managers of the empire, were starting to feel more like independent players than loyal servants. This wasn't just a recipe for inefficiency. It was a slow-cooking disaster waiting to happen. Xerxes' successors, like Artaxerxes I and Roman II, inherited this powder keg. They faced revolts from places like Bactria and satraps with ambitions that rivaled their own. The once unifying royal road had become a highway for dissent, as communication and control weakened over time. The satrapies were no longer just administrative districts. They were potential breakaway states, each with its own agenda. The economic realities were equally grim. The empire's wealth, once as vast as its borders, was dwindling. The burden of constant warfare and rebellion was a leech on the treasury, and the tax system, while innovative, was creaking under the strain. The derrick, that shiny golden coin that had symbolized unity, was beginning to feel like a relic of a more prosperous past. Inflation and corruption seeped into the system, like water through a cracked dam, threatening to burst the empire's economic bubble. As we pore over the decline of the Achaemenid Empire, it's clear that this wasn't just a case of bad luck or poor leadership. It was a complex web of overextension, economic strain, and internal discord, a tapestry unraveling at the seams. The empire, once a beacon of innovation and power, was now grappling with the harsh realities of its own success. So, as we leave Xerxes and his successors struggling to keep the empire from fraying apart, remember that even the mightiest empires are not immune to the tides of history. The Achaemenid Empire, for all its grandeur and ambition, was learning that the higher you climb, the further there is to fall. And with that, we set the stage for the next chapter in this epic saga, where the shadow of decline looms ever larger. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and the final act is yet to unfold. As the sun set on the Achaemenid Empire's days of glory, a new dawn was breaking in Macedon. Enter Alexander the Great, a man who made conquering the known world look like a weekend hobby. By the time he'd finished his whirlwind tour of conquest, the Achaemenid Empire was little more than a fading memory, a lesson in the dangers of reaching too far and holding on too loosely. In 336 BC, Alexander ascended to the throne, inheriting a kingdom that was powerful but still a bit of a backwater compared to the sprawling Persian Empire. But Alexander wasn't one to be content with the status quo. No, he was the kind of guy who'd look at an empire and see a map full of opportunities. By 334 BC, he was ready to expand beyond Macedonian borders, launching his campaign against the Achaemenid Empire with a small but highly trained army of roughly 35,000 men. It was a bold move, like trying to down an elephant with a slingshot. Alexander's first major victory came at the Battle of the Granicus River in 334 BC, where he outmaneuvered the Persian satraps and their troops. It was a classic case of brains over brawn, with Alexander's superior tactics outflanking the Persians' numerical advantage. His next stop was Asia Minor, where he liberated Greek cities under Persian control, a move that won him both territory and the hearts of the locals. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was a master class in public relations. Alexander knew that winning hearts and minds was just as crucial as winning battles. Real turning point came in 333 BC at the Battle of Issus, where Alexander faced off against Darius Roman III, the reigning Achaemenid king. Imagine this, Darius, sitting pretty with an army potentially numbering over 100,000, facing Alexander's 40,000 strong force. It should have been a walk in the park for Darius, but Alexander had other plans. The Macedonian phalanx, a formation as tight as a drum, sliced through the Persian front lines like a hot knife through butter. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family, a rather embarrassing faux pas for an emperor. But let's not sugarcoat it. Alexander's success wasn't just about tactical brilliance. It was also about exploiting the Achaemenid Empire's weaknesses. By this time, the empire was a patchwork quilt of satrapies, each with its own power struggles and ambitions. The central authority was about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. Darius Roman III, though not without his merits, was more a victim of circumstance than a master strategist. His empire was too vast, too diverse, and too unwieldy to rally effectively against a focused and nimble adversary like Alexander. After Issus, Alexander set his sights on the jewel of the Persian Empire, Egypt. By 332 BC, he marched his army into the land of the pharaohs, where he was welcomed as a liberator. The Egyptians, tired of Persian rule, practically rolled out the red carpet. Alexander, ever the opportunist, took the title of pharaoh and founded the city of Alexandria, which would become a hub of culture and commerce. It was a shrewd move, reinforcing his status as a ruler who understood the power of cultural synthesis. The final showdown came at the Battle of Gorgamla in 331 BC. Darius assembled an army that some estimates put at 200,000 strong, a last-ditch effort to halt Alexander's relentless advance. But numbers alone couldn't compensate for a lack of coherent strategy. Alexander, with his crack team of military geniuses, exploited the open terrain to outflank and outwit the Persian forces. Darius's army crumbled, and once again he fled the scene. This wasn't just a defeat, it was the death knell for the Achaemenid Empire. By 330 BC, Alexander had captured the Persian capitals of Babylon, Susa, and finally Persepolis. In a symbolic act that underscored the end of an era, he burned the ladder to the ground, reportedly as retribution for the Persian burning of Athens years earlier. Whether it was an act of strategic intimidation or a drunken mistake, the destruction of Persepolis was a poignant farewell to the city that had once been the heart of a mighty empire. So, what can we learn from the rise and fall of the Achaemenid Empire? Was it truly great, or just a cautionary tale about the perils of imperial overreach? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. The Achaemenid Empire was a marvel of its time, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. Its administration, with its roads, coinage, and bureaucracy, set the stage for future empires. The policy of cultural tolerance, while not without its flaws, was groundbreaking in a world often dominated by conquest and assimilation. Yet the empire's downfall was a reminder of the delicate balance between expansion and sustainability. The Achaemenid rulers, for all their vision, failed to adapt to the changing tides of history. The very elements that once fueled their rise, diversity, vastness, and ambition, became their undoing. It was a classic case of biting off more than they could chew, a lesson in the limits of power and the importance of cohesion. As Alexander marched through the ruins of Persepolis, he might have pondered these same questions. His own empire, though impressive, would similarly crumble after his death, a victim of the same forces that had toppled the Achaemenids. The cycle of rise and fall, of ambition and overreach, continued unabated, a sobering reminder that even the mightiest empires are built on shifting sands. The legacy of the Achaemenid Empire endures, not just in the ruins of Persepolis or the echoes of its royal road, but in the lessons it offers about power, governance, and the human condition. It's a story of ambition and innovation, of triumph and tragedy, a narrative that continues to resonate through the ages. As we close the chapter on this grand historical saga, let's carry forward the insights it provides, remembering that history, much like power, is both a privilege and a responsibility. In the bustling streets of Boston in the early 1700s, young Benjamin Franklin was already conjuring up ways to make his mark on the world. As the 10th son of a candlemaker struggling to keep the flame of prosperity alive, Franklin's early life was nothing short of a series of mischief-fueled experiments. Picture an eager boy with a penchant for getting into trouble, yet armed with a brain sharper than a quill's tip. By the age of 12, he was already knee-deep in ink at his brother James's printing shop, setting the stage for a lifetime of print and wit. Boston in 1718 wasn't exactly a metropolis of opportunity. The town had a population of around 10,000, a far cry from today's bustling cityscapes. Yet it was a microcosm of colonial ambition and economic scrappiness. In this environment, Franklin's cleverness was like a fish in water. By 1721, at the age of 15, he was secretly contributing essays to his brother's paper, the New England Courant, under the pseudonym Silence Dargood. Ah, the irony of a young boy riding under the guise of a middle-aged widow. It was a move that showed his knack for sidestepping societal norms and censorship, even if it meant irking his brother. The Courant itself was a rebellious little rag. It dared to question the local authorities, a big no-no in a time when colonial governors didn't exactly appreciate cheeky columnists. Franklin's satirical style was a breath of fresh air, or perhaps a gust of scandalous wind, in a society that didn't take kindly to criticism. His writings were filled with sharp jabs at the establishment, a touch of humor, and a healthy dose of wisdom far beyond his years. But of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. when James landed in jail for his audacious publications. Young Ben took over the paper. It was a precarious dance on the tightrope of free speech, and one that taught Franklin the art of navigating political landscapes well before he'd ever set foot in the halls of diplomatic power. By the time he turned 17, Franklin's rebellious spirit had outgrown Boston. He ran away to Philadelphia, a city that was arguably the Las Vegas of the 18th century, if Las Vegas were known for its Quaker population and penchant for cheesesteaks. Philadelphia was a larger town, with nearly twice Boston's population and a thriving hub for commerce and ideas. Here, Franklin found work at Samuel Keimer's print shop, a gig that paid just enough to keep the bread and butter coming. But Franklin wasn't one to settle. Within a few years, he'd scrounged up enough money to start his own print shop, and by 1729, he bought the Pennsylvania Gazette. It was here that Franklin's voice began to reach a larger audience, and he wasn't shy about using it. Now, let's talk about Poor Richard's Almanac, Franklin's first major publishing success. First hitting the shelves in 1732, this was more than just a collection of weather forecasts and tide charts. It was a masterclass in wit, wisdom, and marketing genius. Franklin adopted the pseudonym Richard Saunders, crafting a character who was equal parts sage and simpleton. The almanac became a runaway hit, selling as many as 10,000 copies annually, a staggering number for the time. Let's put that into perspective. Colonial America had roughly 2.5 million people by mid-century, so Franklin's almanac was a household staple. The appeal of Poor Richard lay in its pithy proverbs and practical advice, delivered with a twinkle of humor that made readers feel like they were in on the joke. Gems like early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise have stood the test of time. But Franklin's adages weren't just feel-good phrases. They were grounded in the gritty reality of colonial life, where survival often depended on thrift, hard work, and a bit of cunning. But let's not romanticize it too much. Franklin was also a shrewd businessman. He knew how to play the game, using the almanac to subtly criticize the British Crown and colonial authorities, all while dodging censorship like an 18th century ninja. Franklin's ability to balance humor with pointed social commentary made him a beloved figure, but also a bit of a maverick. His almanac was more than just a book. It was a social phenomenon that poked fun at the absurdities of life while offering genuine insights into human nature. Franklin's early successes were no accident. They were the result of a keen mind that understood the power of the written word to shape opinions and challenge the status quo. In the chaotic world of colonial America, where the economic realities were as harsh as the winters, Franklin's cleverness and wit were his greatest allies. He navigated the social and political landscape with the grace of a seasoned diplomat, long before he ever donned the hat of statesman. As we delve further into Franklin's life, remember this. He was a man of contradictions, a lover of puns, and a purveyor of practical wisdom, a rebel with a cause. His journey from a mischievous boy in Boston to a leading figure in Philadelphia was just the beginning. And while the myths of Franklin as a lone genius persist, it's the complexities of his character and the realities he faced that make his story worth telling. Stay tuned, because there's much more to uncover about this founding father who was anything but conventional. Now, let's pivot from Franklin the wordsmith to Franklin the inventor extraordinaire, because this man wasn't just about pithy proverbs and cheeky columns. Oh no, he was also the kind of guy who looked at a stormy sky and thought, I wonder if I could stick a metal rod up there and see what happens. Introducing the lightning rod, Franklin's electrifying contribution to keeping colonial rooftops fire-free. Before this nifty invention, a lightning strike could turn your wooden abode into a bonfire faster than you could say, insurance claim. And let's be real, 18th century insurance wasn't exactly cutting edge. Franklin's lightning rod, invented in the mid-1750, was a game-changer. It worked by providing a low-resistance path for the electric charge to travel to the ground rather than through your chimney. Simple yet brilliant, like most of Franklin's ideas. These rods quickly became the colonial equivalent of must-have tech. By 1753, they were sprouting up on buildings from Philadelphia to Paris. The French, always fashion-forward, even dubbed Franklin the Newton of electricity. Not too shabby for a guy who spent his early years escaping apprenticeships and penning pseudonymous satire. But wait, there's more to Franklin's electrical escapades. A tale so legendary, it's practically mythical. The kite experiment. You know the one, Franklin, a storm, a kite, and a key. It's been romanticized more than a Jane Austen heroine, but let's set the record straight. Franklin did conduct an experiment with a kite in 1752, but he wasn't trying to get struck by lightning like some daredevil. That's a myth more shocking than the electricity itself. What he actually did was fly a kite during a thunderstorm, using a key to draw an electric charge from the storm clouds. He proved that lightning was a form of electricity, but he took precautions to avoid becoming a human lightning rod. Smart move, Ben. Franklin's approach to science was as much about curiosity and amusement as it was about groundbreaking discoveries. He wasn't just conducting experiments, he was having fun with them. Take his work on bifocals, for instance. Franklin grew tired of switching between different pairs of glasses for reading and distance vision. So, like any sensible person with a penchant for invention, he simply cut his lenses in half and stuck them together, creating the first bifocals. Functional, thrifty, and just a bit cheeky, like our man himself. His inventions weren't always about high science, though. Sometimes they were just about making life a bit more comfortable. Enter the Franklin stove, a metal-lined fireplace that improved heat efficiency and reduced smoke output. This was the 1740, folks, a time when staying warm without choking on smoke was the epitome of luxury living. Franklin's stove was more efficient than traditional fireplaces, using less wood and allowing more heat to circulate. It was like a cozy revolution in home heating, and soon every colonial household wanted one. Franklin's tinkering didn't stop there. He invented the glass harmonica, an instrument using glass bowls of different sizes to produce music by friction. It was a hit in Europe, with even Mozart composing pieces for it. Franklin, ever the polymath, was as comfortable composing a symphony of sound as he was composing political treaties. Let's talk about Franklin's scientific method, which was less about sterile lab environments and more about curiosity-fueled playtime. He was a firm believer that science should be accessible and engaging, not locked away in ivory towers. His experiments were often conducted with an air of mischief, like when he demonstrated the principles of electricity by electrifying a turkey. Yes, folks, Franklin electrocuted a turkey, not just for the sake of science, but because, as he put it, the birds killed in this manner eat uncommonly tender. Leave it to Franklin to combine a scientific demonstration with a culinary experiment. Economically, Franklin's inventions were more than just personal triumphs. They had tangible impacts on society. The lightning rod, for instance, saved countless structures from fire, protecting investments and livelihoods. The Franklin stove made heating more efficient, reducing the amount of wood needed, and consequently, the labor and cost involved. These inventions were practical solutions to everyday problems, reflecting Franklin's belief that science should serve humanity. Despite his successes, Franklin was never one to hoard his ideas. He refused to patent his inventions, believing that knowledge should be shared for the public good. A noble sentiment, perhaps, but also one that reflected a savvy understanding of influence. By allowing others to benefit from his inventions, Franklin ingratiated himself with society's elite while enhancing his own reputation as a benevolent genius. As we delve further into his life, it's clear Franklin was a man driven by both curiosity and practicality, a thinker who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. He straddled the line between the Enlightenment's intellectual rigor and the everyday realities of colonial life. And while the myths about him often sparkle with more romance than reality, the truth is just as compelling. Franklin wasn't just a man of ideas. He was a man of action, constantly tinkering with the world around him, always in pursuit of the next great discovery, or, at the very least, the next great punchline. Stay tuned, because the story of Franklin continues to unfold with even more twists and turns. And so, we find Benjamin Franklin, the Renaissance man of the Enlightenment, trading his scientific hat for a powdered wig and an air of diplomacy. Fast forward to the late 1770, and Franklin is now in France, doing what he does best, turning charm into political capital. Why France, you ask? Well, when you're up against the British Empire, it's smart to cozy up to their longtime rival. Plus, the French had a soft spot for Franklin's brand of wit and wisdom. Think of him as a colonial rock star, complete with a fan club of powdered aristocrats. Now, let's set the stage. The American colonies were in the throes of revolution, and they desperately needed allies. Enter Franklin, who at the ripe age of 70 was shipped off to Paris to secure French support. It was the 18th century version of a Hail Mary pass, and Franklin was the perfect quarterback. He arrived in December 1776, and within days he was the talk of the town. How did he do it? Not with military might or grand gestures, but with his unconventional style and a knack for turning awkwardness into advantage. Picture this: the French court, a sea of silk and satin, where fashion was as important as diplomacy. You'd think Franklin, with his plain Quaker garb and fur hat, would be a fish out of water. But no, he turned heads precisely because he was so different. The French couldn't get enough of his rustic charm, a calculated move by Franklin, who knew that standing out was half the battle. While other diplomats dazzled in brocade and lace, Franklin's simplicity spoke volumes. It was the ultimate power move, like showing up to a black tie event in a snazzy turtleneck and still stealing the show. Franklin's time in France wasn't just about winning hearts. It was about winning battles, financial ones. The colonies were broke, folks, and Franklin needed to secure loans and military aid. This wasn't just a case of asking nicely. It was a complex dance of persuasion, backroom deals, and the occasional dinner party. Franklin understood that diplomacy in the 18th century was more about the art of conversation than the stroke of a pen. He navigated the salons of Paris, trading witticisms and insights like currency, turning each social gathering into a strategic opportunity. Let's talk numbers. Franklin managed to secure a whopping 13 million livres in loans and military support. To put that in perspective, that's about $2. 6 billion in today's money. Not too shabby for a septuagenarian with a penchant for lightning rods and witty repartee. This funding was crucial for the American war effort, providing the colonies with the resources to keep fighting the British juggernaut. Franklin's efforts culminated in the Treaty of Alliance in 1778, a formal pact that brought French military power to the American cause. It was a game-changer, turning the tide of war in favor of the colonists. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Diplomacy in the 18th century was a circus of egos and intrigue, and Franklin had to juggle it all with finesse. The French court was a hotbed of gossip and political maneuvering, where allegiances were as fickle as the fashion trends. Franklin had to maintain a delicate balance, charming the right people while fending off those who saw him as a threat to their own ambitions. His ability to navigate these treacherous waters was nothing short of masterful, a testament to his political acumen and social intelligence. Despite his successes, Franklin's time in France wasn't without its challenges. He faced criticism back home for his perceived indulgence in French luxury, a myth that's persisted like a stubborn stain. The reality: Franklin was as pragmatic as ever, understanding that to win French support, he needed to play by their rules. He embraced the culture, dining with philosophers, artists, and politicians, all while keeping his eye on the prize, American independence. Yet, it's the myths about Franklin that often steal the limelight. Tales of his soirees, where he supposedly wooed the French elite with his wit and charm, paint a picture of a man indulging in the excesses of the old world. But the truth is more nuanced. Franklin was a shrewd strategist, using every tool at his disposal to further the American cause. He understood that diplomacy required a deft touch, a mix of sincerity and spectacle that could win over even the most skeptical of allies. Franklin's time in France also highlighted his ability to adapt. He was a master of reinvention, a man who could switch from inventor to statesman with the ease of changing a hat. His experiences in France were a testament to his versatility, a reminder that Franklin was not just a man of science and letters, but a key player on the world stage. His legacy as a diplomat is often overshadowed by his more famous achievements, but it's an essential chapter in the story of American independence. As we delve deeper into Franklin's life, remember that his story is one of contradictions and complexities. He was a man who defied categorization, a thinker who saw the world in shades of gray. His time in France was not just about securing alliances. It was about understanding the power of influence, the art of persuasion, and the importance of cultural diplomacy. In a world where diplomacy was often a theater of the absurd, Franklin was a master playwright, crafting narratives that resonated with his audience and furthered his cause. So, as we continue to explore Franklin's life, let's not forget the lessons he taught us. That diplomacy is as much about charm as it is about strategy, that standing out can be more powerful than blending in, and that sometimes the most effective power moves come wrapped in simplicity. Franklin's journey was far from over, and neither is ours. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover about this founding father who was anything but ordinary. As Franklin wrapped up his diplomatic escapades in France, he returned to America in 1785, a seasoned statesman ready to shape the fledgling nation. But don't think he was just an old man puttering around with a cane and a collection of aphorisms. Franklin still had plenty of tricks up his sleeve. At 79, most of us would be contemplating the virtues of a good rocking chair, but not Ben. He was headed straight for the Constitutional Convention of 1787, ready to leave his indelible mark on American governance. The Constitutional Convention, held in the sweltering summer heat of Philadelphia, was the ultimate gathering of heavyweights. Think of it as the Avengers of the 18th century, minus the capes and with more powdered wigs. Franklin joined the ranks of Washington, Madison, and Hamilton in hammering out the framework of what would become the United States Constitution. His role, the wise elder statesman who could diffuse tension with a well-timed joke or a thought-provoking insight. Franklin was like the Yoda of the assembly, minus the green skin and lightsaber. Now, let's set the scene. America in the late 1780 was a hot mess of state quarrels and economic woes. The Articles of Confederation, America's first attempt at a national government, had all the structural integrity of a house of cards in a hurricane. Enter Franklin and his fellow delegates, tasked with creating a more perfect union. Franklin's contributions were less about writing the document verbatim and more about shaping the spirit of compromise that would define it. In a room full of egos and strong opinions, Franklin was the voice of reason, urging delegates to put aside their differences for the greater good. One of Franklin's key proposals was the idea of a unicameral legislature, a nod to his experience with the Pennsylvania Assembly. But like many of his ideas, this one didn't make it into the final draft. Franklin's real genius was in his ability to smooth over conflicts with his trademark wit. When the convention reached a deadlock over representation in Congress, Franklin famously quipped, "When you assemble a number of men to have the advantage of their joint wisdom, you inevitably assemble with those men all their prejudices, their passions, their errors of opinion, their local interests, and their selfish views. Leave it to Franklin to remind everyone of their human flaws with a twinkle in his eye. But let's talk about something less savory, Franklin's views on slavery. Ah, yes, the proverbial skeleton in the Founding Fathers' closet. Franklin's stance on slavery was a complex web of contradictions. Early in his life, he owned slaves, a fact that's harder to digest than overcooked turkey. But by the 1780, his views had evolved significantly. Franklin became the president of the Pennsylvania Society for promoting the abolition of slavery, advocating for the end of the practice. In 1790, he even petitioned Congress to abolish slavery, though the proposal was ultimately dismissed like a bad joke at a comedy club. Franklin's shift on slavery was both genuine and pragmatic. He understood the economic realities of the time. Slavery was deeply entrenched in the American economy, particularly in the South. Yet, Franklin's progressive ideals pushed him to envision a future free from the shackles of human bondage. His petition to Congress was a bold move, considering the political climate. It was like trying to put out a fire with a teaspoon of water, but Franklin knew that every drop counted. His advocacy didn't lead to immediate change, but it planted seeds that would grow into a larger abolitionist movement. Franklin's later years weren't just about politics and societal change. They were a testament to his unyielding curiosity and zest for life. Even as he approached the twilight of his years, Franklin's mind was as sharp as ever. He continued to correspond with intellectuals around the world, sharing ideas and debates with a fervor that put college dorm room discussions to shame. His letters were peppered with wit and wisdom, like when he famously remarked, "In this world, nothing can be said to be certain, except death and taxes." A phrase that's as relevant today as it was in the 18th century. Some things never change. Franklin's humor was legendary, a tool he wielded with precision to lighten the mood or make a pointed critique. Take his epitaph, For instance, where he likened his body to a book's cover, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding. He suggested that the work would appear once more, in a new and more perfect edition, corrected and amended by the author. It's classic Franklin, musing on mortality with a wink and a nudge, ever the optimist about the afterlife's possibilities. Economically, Franklin was no slouch either. Upon his death in 1790, his estate was valued at £19,000, a tidy sum that reflected his savvy investments and business acumen. But Franklin wasn't content to let his wealth gather dust. He left a portion of it in trust to the cities of Boston and Philadelphia, with the express purpose of funding public works projects and loans for young tradesmen. Talk about a long-term investment. Franklin's bequest was designed to mature over 200 years, a testament to his belief in the power of compound interest and the potential of future generations. Franklin's legacy, much like his life, is a tapestry of contradictions and complexities. He was a man who straddled the line between tradition and progress, a thinker who believed in the power of reason and the potential for change. His contributions to American society were vast, from the philosophical underpinnings of the Constitution to the practical inventions that made everyday life a little bit easier. Franklin left behind a nation grappling with its identity and its ideals, a nation still figuring out how to balance the promises of liberty with the harsh realities of its founding. As we move toward the conclusion of Franklin's story, remember this: Benjamin Franklin was more than just a founding father. He was a man who lived life with curiosity, humor, and a relentless drive to make the world a better place. His journey from mischievous apprentice to revered statesman is a testament to the power of intellect and the importance of staying true to one's values, even in the face of overwhelming odds. So, as we prepare to bid farewell to Franklin, let's carry forward his spirit of inquiry and his unyielding belief in the human capacity for growth and change. There's more to explore as we wrap up the life of this extraordinary man, so stay tuned for the final chapter of Franklin's remarkable journey. And so, we reach the final pages of the Benjamin Franklin saga, where the ink is barely dry on the Constitution, and the man himself is preparing for his curtain call. Franklin's legacy isn't just inked in historical documents. It's the very air of American identity, a quirky blend of innovation, wit, and the occasional lightning bolt of genius. Franklin's legend is a bit like a well-aged wine, complex, with notes of brilliance and the occasional hint of scandal. He's often celebrated as the quintessential American self-made man, a narrative that's as intoxicating as it is simplistic. Here's the thing. Franklin was indeed a polymath, but he was also a man who thrived on contradictions. He was the rebel who became a diplomat, the scientist who dabbled in politics, and the self-taught intellectual who rubbed elbows with Europe's elite. It's these contradictions that make his story so compelling, yet they also give rise to myths as durable as his inventions. Franklin's image has been romanticized to the point where he's practically the patron saint of American ingenuity. But why do these myths persist? Well, for starters, they make for great storytelling. Who doesn't love the tale of the boy who ran away to Philadelphia with pocket change and ended up shaking hands with kings? The truth, though, is that Franklin's success wasn't just a product of hard work and a few clever ideas. It was also about being in the right place at the right time, knowing which doors to knock on, and sometimes which to kick down. Take his famous kite experiment, for instance. The popular image is of a fearless Franklin, daring the elements to prove his theories. The reality: he was a cautious scientist who understood that becoming a human lightning rod wasn't exactly good for longevity. Yet, the myth endures because it captures the daring spirit of discovery that we all like to think lies at the heart of innovation. It's a story that simplifies the messy, often unglamorous reality of scientific progress. Franklin's legacy is deeply entwined with the American dream, a concept that, even in his day, was as much a marketing gimmick as it was a genuine ideal. His life story is a testament to the power of narrative, a reminder that history is often written not just by the victors, but by those who know the value of a good yarn. His autobiography, a bestseller in its own right, cleverly edited his life into a tale of rags to riches, sprinkling in enough humor and wisdom to make it irresistible to generations of readers. But let's get down to brass tacks. Franklin's contributions to American society were substantial and far-reaching. His innovations, both scientific and political, have left a lasting imprint. Economically, his inventions like the Franklin stove and bifocals were game-changers, improving everyday life and making significant contributions to the burgeoning colonial economy. His refusal to patent his inventions was a stroke of genius in itself, not just a magnanimous gesture, but a savvy move to cement his reputation as a public benefactor. Politically, Franklin's influence is woven into the very fabric of American governance. His role in the Constitutional Convention was pivotal, not because he was the loudest voice, but because he was the calm amidst the storm. His ability to broker compromise and diffuse tensions was crucial in shaping the Constitution, a document that, for all its flaws, remains a cornerstone of American democracy. His advocacy for unity and pragmatic governance resonates even today as the nation continues to grapple with the challenges of a diverse and often divided society. And then there's Franklin, the cultural icon. His face adorns the $100 bill, a nod to his status as a symbol of American prosperity and ingenuity. But it's also a bit ironic, considering that Franklin himself was wary of unchecked capitalism. He believed in the power of community and public good, values that can sometimes get lost in the hustle and bustle of modern economic life. Yet, the image of Franklin as a proto-capitalist persists, a testament to how history can be molded to fit contemporary narratives. Franklin's life remains a rich source of inspiration, and yes, laughter. His wit and humor are as relevant today as they were in the 18th century, offering a valuable reminder that wisdom doesn't have to be solemn. His quips and observations cut through the noise, delivering truths that are both profound and accessible. Whether he was musing on the certainties of death and taxes, or penning witty aphorisms about life's absurdities, Franklin had a knack for making the complex seem simple, the serious seem light. As we draw this journey to a close, let's remember that Franklin's story is about more than just the man himself. It's about the power of ideas, the importance of adaptability, and the enduring appeal of a well-told tale. Franklin was a pioneer, not just in the scientific and political arenas, but in the art of crafting a legacy. He understood that how we are remembered is often as important as what we achieve. His life is a reminder that history is as much about myth as it is about fact, and that sometimes the two are inseparable. So, as you drift off to sleep, cradled by the comforting hum of Franklin's legacy, ponder this. What myths will we leave behind, and how will they shape the future? Franklin may have been a man of his time, but his story continues to resonate, challenging us to think critically about the narratives we create and the legacies we leave. In the end, Franklin's greatest invention might just be the enduring tale of his own life, a story that, much like the man himself, is full of surprises, contradictions, and a dash of humor. In the sun-drenched valleys of ancient Greece, where olive oil was as plentiful as gossip, a city-state was busy perfecting the art of turning boys into battle-hardened warriors. Welcome to Sparta, population. Tough. You might think of Sparta as the ancient version of a gym where everyone's always doing leg day. But before you romanticize this city of chiseled abs and fearsome spears, let's unpack why young Spartan lads were whisked away from their families at the tender age of 7. Yep, 7. For context, that's the age where most kids today are mastering the fine art of tying their shoelaces, not learning how to march in formation or wield a sword. The Spartan military system was nothing if not thorough, and it all started with the infamous agoge. This was no ordinary school, unless your idea of school includes survival skills, combat training, and a healthy dose of state-sponsored discipline. Picture a boot camp that would make today's military basic training look like a weekend yoga retreat. The agoge was less about reading, writing, and arithmetic, and more about learning how to endure pain, survive on minimal rations, and become as stealthy as a cat burglar at a cheese convention. Now, why would any society subject its youth to such rigorous training? The answer lies not just in creating elite warriors, but in maintaining control over the Helot population. The Helots were essentially the state-owned serfs of Sparta, doing all the unglamorous work, while the Spartans perfected their warrior skills. With Helots outnumbering Spartans by as many as 7 to 1, The agoge was as much about instilling fear and control as it was about building a military juggernaut. Spartan boys, upon entering the agoge, were stripped of familial comforts and thrust into a communal lifestyle that revolved around discipline and austerity. The young recruits had to fend for themselves, often encouraged to steal food to supplement their meager rations. But woe betide the boy who got caught. Punishment was swift and severe. The lesson: if you're going to steal, be good at it. Talk about tough love. The Spartan curriculum was exhaustive and exhausting. From physical training to survival skills, the agoge aimed to create individuals who were not only physically formidable, but also mentally resilient. The boys learned to endure hardship without complaint, cultivating a stoic demeanor that was as much a part of their armor as their shields. This approach wasn't merely about individual prowess. It was a social engineering feat designed to produce citizens who could withstand the rigors of war and the whims of fate. In this system, individuality was as welcome as a toga at a nudist colony. The Spartans valued unity and conformity, believing that a tightly knit phalanx, Sparta's famed military formation, was stronger than any single warrior. This collective mindset was embedded in every aspect of Spartan life, from the way they ate their meals to the way they fought their battles. The Spartans didn't just train for war, they lived it every day. While it's tempting to see the Spartan system as a macho paradise, the reality was more complex. The agoge was a crucible that, while producing exceptional soldiers, also demanded the suppression of individual desires and ambitions. Spartan society was a well-oiled machine, but it was one that ran on the sacrifice of personal freedoms and the iron will of its people. The political reasons behind this rigorous system were as sharp as a Spartan spear. The constant threat of Helot uprisings meant that Spartans needed to be ever ready, ever vigilant. The agoge ensured that from a young age, Spartan boys were indoctrinated into a culture of readiness and resilience. The military system was less about expanding territory and more about maintaining the status quo, an irony not lost on a city-state famed for its military prowess. In a world where power dynamics could shift as quickly as the tides, Sparta's approach was both pragmatic and brutal. They didn't just want warriors, they needed guardians of their way of life. And so, the agoge became more than just a training ground. It was the backbone of Spartan society, shaping citizens who were as ready to defend their land as they were to sacrifice for it. This was Sparta, a city-state where the military wasn't just a career, but a way of life, and the agoge was the crucible in which boys were forged into the men who would carry on its legacy. It was a world that demanded much, and offered little in return, except the knowledge that you were part of something larger than yourself, something that had stood the test of time, and would continue to do so as long as young boys were willing to trade their childhoods for the honor of a Spartan shield. In this world of unyielding discipline and relentless training, the Spartan phalanx was the ultimate expression of their military might, a human tank formed of tightly packed warriors, shields interlocked like a 300-pound game of Twister. This formation was as iconic as it was effective, a testament to Spartan discipline and unity. The phalanx was more than just a battle strategy. It was a physical manifestation of the Spartan ethos. Each hoplite, the citizen soldier of Sparta, was a cog in this military machine, trained to trust their comrades implicitly. It was the collective that mattered, not the individual, and this mindset was drilled into them from the moment they entered the agoge. Now, let's talk about the hoplite, the backbone of the Spartan army. These weren't your average Joe soldiers. These were men who'd spent their lives honing their skills and bodies for war. Clad in the iconic red cloak, because if you're going to battle, you might as well be fashionable. Each hoplite carried the Aspi's shield, a round bulwark of wood and bronze weighing around 15 pounds. Add to that a 7-9-foot spear and a short sword, and you've got yourself a walking armory. But let's not forget the armor, a bronze cuirass, greaves, and that famous helmet with a plume that screamed, "I'm here to conquer your city-state and look fabulous doing it." But here's the kicker. All this gear wasn't free. Equipping a hoplite was like buying a small car today. The cost was significant enough to put a strain on the average Spartan family, who, let's face it, weren't exactly rolling in drachmas. This economic reality was a perennial thorn in the side of Spartan society, which was built on the backs of the Helots. Maintaining a military machine of this caliber required resources, and lots of them. The Helots did the farming, the crafting, the everything that wasn't fighting, while the Spartans focused on being the best-dressed warriors in the ancient world. Yet, behind the glamour of the crimson cloak and the gleaming bronze, there was a brutal economic truth. The Spartan lifestyle demanded a constant supply of able-bodied men ready to don the hoplites' gear and march to war. This put immense pressure on Spartan citizens to produce soldiers, not scholars or artisans. The state-sponsored education system didn't exactly churn out philosophers or playwrights. Instead, it molded warriors who could hold the line in battle but might struggle with basic arithmetic. Let's not pretend that Sparta was all glory and no guts. The romantic image of the Spartan warrior, the stoic hero of countless retellings, often glosses over the very real challenges they faced. Warfare was not a weekend hobby. It was a full-time job with no retirement plan. And while the phalanx might sound like an indomitable force, the reality was that it required constant training and coordination. One misstep, one weak link, and the whole formation could crumble faster than a cookie in milk. The phalanx relied on the unwavering discipline of its hoplites, men who had to trust their lives to the shield of the man next to them. A trust built through years of shared hardships and relentless drills. The economic pressures extended beyond the battlefield. The need for continuous military readiness meant that the Spartan state was in a perpetual state of mobilization. Even in peacetime, preparations for war were as constant as the Mediterranean sun. This required a surplus of resources that the Helots had to provide. It's no wonder the Helots were less than thrilled with their lot in life, leading to frequent uprisings that the Spartans had to quash with brutal efficiency. It was a vicious cycle. The more the Spartans relied on Helots to maintain their lifestyle, the more they had to suppress them, which in turn justified the militarization that defined Spartan society. The myth of the Spartan warrior as a paragon of virtue and valor is tempting, but it obscures the harsher realities. These were men shaped by a system that demanded everything and offered little in return. They were taught to endure, to fight, to win, but not how to live beyond the battlefield. The Spartan military machine was a marvel of ancient engineering, a testament to what a society could achieve when it put war above all else. But it came at a cost, both economic and human, that few other city-states were willing or able to pay. As we peel back the layers of Spartan society, it's clear that the romantic image of the warrior is only part of the story. The reality was a complex tapestry of economic necessity, social engineering, and relentless discipline. In the world of Sparta, being a warrior was not just a role but an identity, forged in the fires of the agoge and tested on the fields of battle. It was a life of sacrifice, where personal ambition was subsumed by the needs of the state, and glory was measured not by individual feats, but by the success of the phalanx. So, next time you hear tales of Spartan heroism, remember that behind every legendary warrior was a system that demanded more than just courage. It demanded a way of life that was as exacting as it was extraordinary, a life that was, for better or worse, entirely Spartan. And as we continue to unravel the myth from the man, we find a society that was as much about survival as it was about supremacy, a society where the line between soldier and citizen was as thin as a spear's edge. Now, speaking of Spartan society, let's pivot to a group often overlooked in the testosterone-fueled tales of warrior glory, the women. If you bought into the legend, you'd think Spartan women were the original feminists, strutting around with more freedom than their Athenian sisters, who were stuck at home weaving and whispering. But before we hand them a posthumous equality badge, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of their lives. Spartan women were indeed a different breed, or at least they had different expectations thrust upon them. Compared to other Greek city-states, where women were about as visible as a solar eclipse, Spartan women had more visibility and a more active role in society. They were expected to be fit, healthy, and ready to produce the next generation of warriors. A healthy body meant healthy offspring, or so the Spartan logic went. This was less about gender equality and more about breeding the best stock for the Spartan military machine. Talk about being valued for your womb's potential. In terms of economic power, Spartan women were not your typical ancient housewives. They could own and control property, which was pretty revolutionary for the time. In fact, by the 4th century BCE, women owned nearly 40% of Spartan land. That's right, 40%. Compare that to Athens, where women owning property was as rare as a vegetarian lion, and you can see why the myth of Spartan gender equality persists. But before we start applauding the Spartans for their progressive property laws, let's remember why this was the case. Spartan men were often away on military campaigns or busy with their rigorous training, leaving women to manage the estates. This wasn't a feminist victory. It was a necessity. The Spartans didn't grant women these rights out of the goodness of their hearts. It was a practical solution to ensure economic stability and continuity. Spartan women had to step up not because they were liberated, but because someone had to keep the wheels of the economy turning while the men were off perfecting their spear-throwing techniques. And let's not forget their primary societal role, producing strong warriors. If you think modern parenting pressure is intense, try being a Spartan woman. Their value was measured by their ability to bear sons who could one day don the crimson cloak. The expectation was clear: produce warriors or be deemed a failure. Spartan mothers were famous for telling their sons to return from battle with their shield or on it. It's not exactly a Hallmark card sentiment, but it encapsulates the brutal pragmatism of Spartan life. So, did Spartan women enjoy more freedom than their counterparts elsewhere in Greece? Yes, but it was freedom with a capital F for function. The societal structure was still deeply patriarchal, with women's roles defined by their ability to contribute to the state's military needs. It's like being given the keys to the kingdom, but only if you promise to keep the castle stocked with soldiers. But let's not paint Spartan women as mere pawns in the military game. They had their own agency and influence, often acting as the stewards of family wealth and the educators of future warriors. They were the silent architects of Spartan society, ensuring the home front was just as disciplined and prepared as the battlefield. And while they might not have wielded spears, they wielded a different kind of power, one that was economic and societal, if not overtly political. This leads us to a tale from the ancient historian Plutarch, who wrote about a Spartan queen named Gorgo. When asked by an Athenian woman why Spartan women could control their men, she famously replied, "Because we are the only women who give birth to men." Now, as pithy as that sounds, it's a bit of a PR spin. The reality was that Spartan women were part of a well-oiled state apparatus designed to keep the Spartan war machine running smoothly. In the grand narrative of Spartan life, women played a crucial role, but not necessarily an enviable one. Their lives were dictated by the needs of the state, their personal ambitions subsumed by the collective goal of military supremacy. They were part of a society that prioritized power and survival above all else, and they adapted to play their part in that unyielding system. So, next time you hear about the freedoms of Spartan women, remember that their freedom was in service of a greater societal machine, a machine that demanded efficiency and output above all else. They were liberated only in the sense that they were free to fulfill their expected roles that were as vital as they were confining. It's a story of resilience and adaptation, a testament to the complexities of gender roles in a society that prioritized the state over the individual. As we continue to unravel the myth from the reality, it's clear that the story of Spartan women is one of both empowerment and limitation. They navigated a world defined by war, not through swords and shields, but through land and lineage. In the end, while they might not have fought on the battlefield, they were indeed soldiers of a different kind, marching to the relentless drumbeat of Spartan society. And as we peel back the layers, we see not just the legendary figures of history, but the real women who lived, adapted, and thrived in a world that demanded so much from them. While Spartan women held the fort, quite literally, their male counterparts were busy shaping the future of Greece through a series of external conflicts and alliances that would make Game of Thrones look like a neighborhood potluck. Let's start with one of history's most celebrated last stands, the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE. Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans, led by King Leonidas, faced off against the Persian juggernaut led by Xerxes. You might remember it as the epic showdown where Gerard Butler screamed, "This is Sparta." But let's peel back the cinematic bravado and get down to historical brass tacks. Thermopylae wasn't just about Spartans flexing their military muscles. It was a strategic holding action. Leonidas and his men, joined by around 7,000 other Greeks, faced overwhelming odds. Xerxes' Persian force was a veritable armada, with estimates ranging from 100,000 to 300,000 troops. Talk about bringing a gun to a knife fight. Leonidas chose the narrow pass at Thermopylae because it nullified the Persian numerical advantage. It was a classic case of quality over quantity, ancient style. The Spartans and their allies held the pass for 3 days, a feat of military endurance and tactical brilliance. This wasn't just about holding a line. It was about buying time for the rest of Greece to mobilize and prepare for the Persian onslaught. But even the best-laid plans can go awry, especially when a local shepherd named Ephialtes betrayed the Greeks by revealing a hidden path to the Persians. Betrayal. It's as old as civilization itself. Despite the overwhelming Persian numbers, the Spartan stand became legendary, a symbol of heroic resistance against tyranny. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Spartan sacrifice was strategic, a calculated move to rally the other Greek city-states to the cause. It was less about glory and more about survival. Leonidas's last stand was a PR victory that echoed throughout history, proving that sometimes the story you tell is as powerful as the sword you wield. Now, let's talk alliances. Sparta wasn't a lone wolf prowling the ancient world. It was more like the alpha of a pack. Enter the Peloponnesian League, a coalition of city-states led by Sparta, formed in the 6th century BCE. This wasn't a friendly neighborhood association. It was a military alliance that Sparta used to extend its influence across the Peloponnese. The League was Sparta's answer to the Delian League, led by Athens. Think of it as the ancient Greek version of NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. The Peloponnesian League was crucial in maintaining Sparta's hegemony in the region. It wasn't just a collection of loyal followers. It was a strategic tool that allowed Sparta to project power without overextending itself. The League provided Sparta with troops and resources, allowing them to maintain their military dominance without exhausting their own citizenry. It was a classic case of divide and rule, a political chess game played with harp-like pieces. The alliances weren't just about military might. They were about political maneuvering. Sparta had a reputation to uphold as the Greek world's military powerhouse. But maintaining this image required finesse, especially when faced with internal strife like the constant threat of Helot uprisings. The Peloponnesian League allowed Sparta to flex its muscles when needed while keeping a tight grip on home affairs. It was a balancing act worthy of a high-wire artist. One misstep, and the whole thing could come crashing down. Yet, even the mighty Spartans had to deal with the occasional PR disaster. Take the infamous surrender at the Battle of Sphacteria in 425 BCE during the Peloponnesian War. Sparta, known for never surrendering, had to eat humble pie when a group of Spartans was captured by the Athenians. It was a scandal that shook the Spartan image to its core, proving that even the best can have an off day. But like any savvy spin doctor, Sparta managed to recover, using their alliances and reputation to bounce back from the blunder. The Peloponnesian War itself, a decades-long conflict between Athens and Sparta, was a political chess game on steroids. It was a clash of titans, a war of attrition that left both sides exhausted. Sparta's ultimate victory in 404 BCE was as much about strategic alliances and economic warfare as it was about military might. The Spartans managed to outlast Athens, thanks in part to Persian gold that funded their navy, a plot twist that no one saw coming. Who knew the Persians would bankroll the Spartans against their old Athenian foes? It's like a soap opera with spears. Sparta's military evolution wasn't just forged on the battlefield. It was shaped by the constant political and strategic maneuvering required to maintain its dominance. This was a world where allegiances could shift faster than a chariot on a wet road, and Sparta had to stay one step ahead. Their reputation as a military powerhouse was built not only on the backs of their hoplites, but also on their ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Greek politics. The Spartan story is one of contrasts, the romantic image of the fearless warrior versus the harsh reality of a society constantly on the brink of collapse. It's a tale of strategic brilliance and brutal pragmatism, where the line between heroism and hubris was as thin as a Corinthian column. As we delve deeper into the Spartan saga, it becomes clear that their story is not just about battles fought and won, but about the intricate dance of power and politics that defined their era. So next time you hear the tale of the 300 or the formation of the Peloponnesian League, Remember that behind every legend lies a complex web of strategy, sacrifice, and survival. Sparta wasn't just a city-state. It was a masterclass in ancient statecraft, where the art of war was matched only by the art of diplomacy. And as we continue to explore this fascinating chapter of history, we see that the Spartans were more than just warriors. They were architects of a legacy that has endured the test of time. As we continue to unravel the tangled threads of Sparta's history, it's time to face the uncomfortable truth. Even the mightiest warriors can run out of steam. The Spartan military system, once the stuff of legend, didn't so much as fall as it did fizzle out, like a pop song that's played one too many times. So, what went wrong for the city that once boasted of hoplites tougher than a $2 steak? Let's dive into the economic strains, population decline, and political rigidity that brought Sparta to its knees. First up, let's talk economics. Sparta's financial model was about as stable as a Jenga tower in a hurricane. Their reliance on Helot labor might have seemed like a brilliant way to let Spartans focus on flexing their military muscles, but it was a fiscal house of cards. Helots worked the land, producing the food and resources that kept the Spartan juggernaut rolling. But here's the kicker. The constant need to suppress Helot uprisings meant that Sparta was always one revolt away from economic disaster. It was a vicious cycle. More military might required more resources, which required more Helot labor, which required more military might. It's enough to make your head spin faster than a discus at the Olympic Games. Then there's the population issue, a problem that would make any modern demographer break out in a cold sweat. The Spartan citizenry, the homoioi, were dwindling faster than you could say, Marlon Labe. The reasons were complex, involving a cocktail of late marriages, low birth rates, and the ever-present specter of warfare thinning the ranks. By the time the Battle of Leuctra rolled around in 371 BCE, where Thebes handed Sparta a defeat that stung worse than a Spartan mother's rebuke, the number of full citizens had shrunk to about 1/500. To put that in perspective, that's fewer people than you'd find at a midweek minor league baseball game. And let's not overlook the political rigidity that choked Sparta's ability to adapt. For a society that was all about discipline and order, Sparta's government was about as flexible as a lead pipe. Their dual kingship system, combined with a council of elders known as the Gerousia and the Assembly of Citizens, might have worked when stability was the name of the game. But as the geopolitical landscape shifted, Sparta's refusal to innovate left them stuck in a bygone era. The Helots were restless, the citizen population was shrinking, and yet the Spartan response was to double down on tradition. It's like trying to solve a modern traffic jam by building more horse stables. As the 4th century BCE wore on, Sparta found itself outmaneuvered politically and militarily. The city-state that once inspired fear across the Aegean had become a shadow of its former self. The inability to adapt economically and politically meant that Sparta couldn't keep pace with the changing world. The once mighty phalanx, the pride of Sparta, was now more historical artifact than military powerhouse. And yet, despite this decline, the Spartan military myth lives on, stubbornly refusing to go gentle into that good night. From Hollywood blockbusters to motivational gym posters, the image of the Spartan warrior remains a symbol of indomitable strength. The romantic allure of the Spartan ethos, with its emphasis on discipline, sacrifice, and unity, continues to captivate our imaginations. But while it's easy to get swept up in the legend, the historical reality paints a more nuanced picture. Spartans were indeed formidable, but they were also human, grappling with the same challenges of resource management, political infighting, and societal pressures as any other civilization. What can modern societies learn from the rise and fall of Sparta's legendary military? For starters, no amount of military prowess can compensate for a lack of economic stability. A society that neglects its economic foundation is building a castle on sand. Likewise, the importance of adaptability cannot be overstated. A rigid adherence to tradition may provide short-term stability, but in the long run, it can be a society's undoing. The ability to innovate and respond to changing circumstances is as crucial today as it was in ancient Greece. Moreover, the Spartan story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of societal imbalance. When a culture places too much emphasis on one aspect, be it military, economic, or otherwise. It risks neglecting other vital components that ensure its survival. Sparta's focus on military excellence came at the expense of cultural, economic, and political development, leaving it vulnerable when the winds of change blew. In the end, the Spartans remind us that while legends are inspiring, they are not always instructive. The myth of Sparta endures because it taps into our fascination with strength and resilience, qualities that are universally admired. But the reality of Sparta's decline offers a more sobering lesson. That strength without adaptability is a brittle thing, and that even the most formidable warrior can be undone by the very systems that once made them strong. As we bid farewell to the world of Sparta, we're left with a tapestry of contrasts: legend and reality, strength and fragility, permanence and impermanence. It's a story that continues to resonate, not just as a tale of warriors and battles, but as a reflection on the complexities of human societies. So next time you hear the rallying cry of "This is Sparta," remember that behind the myth lies a history rich with lessons, as relevant today as they were 2.5 millennia ago. And maybe, just maybe, that's the true legacy of the Spartans. A reminder that while we may admire the past, it's the lessons we draw from it that shape our future.